Welcome to Anonna's creation. Tonight we journey into the fog, to a place marked on no official chart, a place whispered about only in the hushed tones of seasoned sailors. We travel to a stretch of water where the sea holds its darkest secrets, and where a song carries on the wind, a lethal melody that no man has ever resisted. This is the story of the Sirens. Pause. Town of Port Beacon, Maine, clings to the rocky coastline like a stubborn barnacle. It's a place of gray skies, biting winds, and the constant lonely cry of the foghorn. For generations, the people here have lived by the sea, and they have learned to fear it. They don't fear the storms or the cold or the crushing depths. They fear the passage that lies just 12 miles offshore, a treacherous maze of jagged rocks and unpredictable currents known to locals only as the Graveyard Strait. Ships don't just sink in the strait. They vanish. Modern vessels with state-of-the-art GPS, seasoned fishing crews who have known these waters their whole lives, even military patrol boats, all have been swallowed by the fog that perpetually shrouds the area. The official reports cite magnetic anomalies, rogue waves, or sudden uncharted shoals. But the old-timers at the Salty Dog Tavern, nursing their warm whiskeys, know the truth. It isn't the rocks that take them. It's the song. They say on quiet nights when the wind shifts just right, you can hear it. A melody that doesn't just enter your ears but seeps directly into your bones. It's a sound of profound beauty, of impossible promises, of everything your heart has ever desired. Men who hear it, they say, lose their minds. They steer their ships straight toward the jagged black teeth of the rocks, desperate to find the source of that heavenly sound. They call them the Sirens. No one who has seen them has lived to describe them. All that remains are the wrecks, piled upon each other in the deep, and the chilling, half-crazed last radio transmissions. It's beautiful. I see them, they're calling. Into this town of grim warnings and lost hope comes Captain Elias Thorne. Elias was not a man given to fantasy. He was a creature of logic, steel, and sonar. He was the best deep-sea salvage operator on the East Coast, his face weathered by salt and skepticism, his hands scarred from decades of wrestling the ocean for its scraps. His ship, the Ironclad, was a marvel of modern technology, a brute of a vessel equipped with multi-beam sonar, deep-dive ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, and a reinforced hull designed to withstand the worst the Atlantic could throw at it. Elias had come to Port Beacon not to hunt myths, but to find the truth. 20 years ago, his father, Captain Jacob Thorne, had disappeared in the Graveyard Strait. Jacob's ship, the Pioneer, wasn't a rust bucket, it was a modern research vessel. Its last transmission was a garbled cry of static and what sounded impossibly like singing. The official inquiry was inconclusive. Elias, then just a young man, was left with a lifetime of unanswered questions. Now, funded by a wealthy benefactor obsessed with maritime mysteries, Elias was back. He wasn't looking for monsters. He was looking for a geological explanation, a pocket of methane gas, an acoustic phenomenon created by underwater caves, anything that would put his father's ghost to rest. He spent his first week in Port Beacon gathering data. He analyzed tidal charts, weather patterns, and shipping manifests. He ignored the whispers and the pitying looks from the locals. His final stop was the Port Beacon Maritime Museum, a small, dusty building run by the town's resident historian and folklorist, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a sharp, intelligent woman in her late 60s, her eyes holding the same deep gray wisdom as the ocean itself. She had listened patiently as Elias laid out his theories in her cluttered office, surrounded by ship models and glass-cased compasses. Magnetic interference, Elias said, tapping a nautical chart of the strait. Or perhaps severe infrasound, generated by wave action in the submerged caverns we've mapped, can cause disorientation, auditory hallucinations. Fear. Evelyn slowly pushed a thick, leather-bound book across the desk. It was a collection of local legends, handwritten entries dating back to the 1700s. Captain Thorne, she began, her voice quiet but firm. You are a man of science. I respect that. You see anomalies and frequencies. People of this town, my ancestors, they didn't have that language. They just had the results. Ships broken on rocks. Men lost, with looks of agonizing ecstasy frozen on their faces. Old wives' tales, Dr. Reed. Tragedies that need an explanation, so people invent monsters. Do they? She opened the book to a marked page. It was a captain's log from 1844, the script frantic and spidery. The fog rolled in, thick as wool, she read. Heard the singing. Not angels, no. Something else. They promised me my wife Sarah back from the grave. I told the men to block their ears with tar, but I must know. That ship, the Sea Serpent, was found dashed to pieces on the central spire. The crew was gone. Elias leaned back, crossing his arms. Hypnosis. Mass hysteria. A desperate captain hearing what he wanted to hear. Evelyn sighed, closing the book. You are looking for it, Captain. You are looking for a what? You believe the danger is in the water, in the air. The families of the lost know the danger is in you. It's in your heart. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor. That song, Captain Thorne, it doesn't just call to you. Calls for you. Finds the one thing you lost, the one thing you crave above all else, and it offers it to you. For your father, perhaps it was discovery. For others, lost love. For you, what will it be, Elias? Closure. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, but he masked it with a curt nod. I appreciate the warning, Doctor. But I trust my sonar, not folklore. My crew is prepared. We're using noise-canceling comms, frequency dampeners. We're not going in blind. No one ever does, Evelyn said softly. They go in deaf. But the song isn't heard with the ears. It's heard with the soul. Elias left the museum, the scent of old paper and dust clinging to him. He tried to shake off her words, but the unease lingered. He was a practical man, a man of iron and diesel. But as he looked out at the impenetrable bank of fog that marked the edge of the graveyard strait, he couldn't help but feel that he wasn't just sailing toward a magnetic anomaly. He was sailing toward something that was waiting. That evening, the Ironclad slipped its moorings. The small crowd that had gathered on the dock watched in silence. No one waved. No one wished him luck. They just watched, as they had watched so many others, as the ship's powerful lights grew smaller and smaller before being swallowed completely by the fog. On the bridge, Elias Thorne gripped the controls, his eyes fixed on the sonar screen. His crew, a small, professional team of technicians, manned their stations, their faces illuminated by the green glow of the instruments. All right, people, Elias said, his voice steady over the comms. We're crossing the threshold. Full sensor array. Log everything. We find the pioneer, we find the anomaly, and we get out. For the first hour, there was nothing but the rhythmic ping of the sonar and the muffled groan of the engines. The fog outside was absolute, a white wall that deadened all sound. Then the first mate, a young, capable man named Ben Carter, looked up from his console. Captain, I'm getting something. A distortion. Audio frequencies. But it's strange. It's not mechanical. Put it on the speaker, Ben, Elias ordered. Ben flipped a switch. First it was just static. A high-pitched whine. But then beneath the static it began. A sound. A single pure note that hung in the air, followed by another and another. It was a harmony unlike anything they had ever heard. It was beautiful. And it was terrifying. It wasn't coming over the radio. It was coming from the water itself. Elias grabbed the intercom. All hands. Noise cancellation headsets. Now. Seal the bridge. But Ben Carter didn't move. He was staring, transfixed, at the radar screen, though it showed nothing but static. Ben! Elias shouted, shaking his arm. Ben turned to him, his eyes wide, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. Captain, he whispered, do you hear that? They sound just like my mother. The song was in the ship. The bridge of the Ironclad was sealed, yet the melody permeated the reinforced steel. It wasn't sound, it was a vibration, a pressure that Elias felt in his teeth and behind his eyes. Ben Carter, his best technician, was lost to it. My mother, he whispered again, tears welling. She's calling for me, Captain. She says it's not cold. Ben! Snap out of it! Elias shouted. He grabbed the heavy-duty noise-canceling headset from his own station and slammed it over Ben's ears. Carter! Report! Ben blinked, his body shuddering as if waking from a deep sleep. The look of blissful peace vanished, replaced by stark, animal terror. I don't... What was that? Captain, it's in my head. He scrambled back, clawing at the headset as if it were on fire. Keep it on. Elias roared, grabbing Ben by the shoulders and shoving him hard into his seat. "It's an auditory illusion. Infrasound. It's not real. Focus on your console." The other two crew members, Riley and Diaz, were pale but holding steady, their own headsets clamped tight. "Diaz, what's our position?" Elias demanded, turning back to the helm. "Drifting, Captain," Diaz replied, his voice tight. "Currents are pulling us east, toward the central spires. And the sonar, sir, it's going haywire. The water is full of ghosts. False echoes. I can't get a clean reading." "Keep trying," Elias ordered, his knuckles white on the controls. He was a man of steel and sonar. This had to be a natural phenomenon. He would not let his ship be crewed by hysterics. Then the song changed. The beautiful, ethereal harmony that had mesmerized Ben faded. Pressure in Elias's head did not lessen. Focused. Sharpened. Stopped being a choir and became a single, familiar sound. Static. It was the specific crackle of an old single-sideband marine radio. And beneath the static, a voice. "Mayday. Mayday. This is the Pioneer." Static trapped, the anomaly is, it's not. Elias froze. His blood turned to ice. It was his father's voice. "Captain?" Riley asked, noticing the change in his posture. Elias held up a hand for silence, his head tilted, listening to a sound only he could hear. The voice was weak, laced with the same static that had haunted his nightmares for 20 years. "Elias, son, is that you? I knew you'd come. I found it. Elias, it's beautiful, a new world." "Father," Elias whispered. He was no longer on the bridge of the Ironclad. He was 20 years in the past, a young man standing by the radio, waiting for a call that never came. The guilt, the rage, the desperate, hollow ache of not knowing, it all flooded back. "It's a lie," Elias muttered, shaking his head. "It's an echo. A hallucination." But the voice was so real. "I'm close, Elias. Don't let them stop you. They're trying to keep it for themselves. Just a little further, follow the signal. I'm waiting for you. Where are you?" Elias found himself saying, his hand drifting from the ship's controls toward the radio transmitter. "Captain!" Diaz suddenly screamed. "Rocks. Dead ahead. 200 yards." Elias snapped his head up. On the forward-looking sonar, a massive, jagged pillar of rock, one of the infamous spires, was directly in their path. The ship was drifting toward it, pulled by the lethal current, while its captain stood paralyzed by a ghost. "Yes, son, that's it. Come to me. We can finally go home," his father's voice urged, full of warmth and promise. Elias looked from the sonar screen to the radio, his mind split in two. Promise of an answer, of seeing his father, of finally ending the mystery that had defined his entire life, was right there. All he had to do was let the ship drift. Dr. Reed's voice echoed in his memory. "The danger is in your heart. Finds the one thing you crave." "It's not real," Elias hissed, the words a desperate prayer. "Captain, impact in 90 seconds." Diaz yelled, unbuckling, ready to brace. The voice was weeping now. "You're abandoning me. Elias, don't leave me again, please, it's so dark." "No," Elias bellowed. He slammed his fist against the radio, shattering the speaker. He grabbed the helm and jammed the throttles for the bow thrusters and the main engines into a hard, screaming reverse. The Ironclad groaned in protest. The engines roared, fighting the pull of the current. The deck shuddered violently, throwing Riley from his chair. Ben, still strapped in, stared out the fog-shrouded viewport, his eyes wide with terror. On the sonar, the spire loomed like a giant's tooth. Elias wrestled with the controls, sweat stinging his eyes. The ship's backward momentum was agonizingly slow. Current was too strong. "It's not enough," Riley shouted from the floor. "We're going to hit. Full port thruster," Elias commanded, spinning the wheel. "Divert auxiliary power. Now." The ship lurched sideways. A terrible, high-pitched shriek of metal scraping rock screamed through the hull, a sound that vibrated in their chests. The ship tilted violently to starboard, pitching Diaz and Riley against the bulkhead. Then silence. The engines idled. The screeching stopped. The ship was still. For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. They were alive. "Damage report," Elias said, his voice a harsh rasp. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of fighting his own mind. We're stable, Captain," Diaz managed, pulling himself back to his console. "Outer hull breach, starboard bow, but the inner hull is holding. No water intake. We just grazed it. I don't know how." "We were lucky," Elias said curtly, wiping his face. "Ben, are you with us?" Ben Carter nodded, slowly removing the headset. His face was pale. The singing. It's gone." Elias listened. Ben was right. The pressure in his head, the voices, the static, all of it had vanished. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the computers and the frantic pounding of his own heart. "Why did it stop?" Riley asked, nursing his shoulder. "Maybe we passed the source," Elias said, though he didn't believe it. "Or maybe," he added, looking at the smashed radio, "it doesn't like being told no." He turned back to his command chair, the phantom of his father's voice still ringing in his ears. He had faced the song, and for now he had won. His skepticism was shattered, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Evelyn Reed was right. This was no anomaly. This was a predator. "Diaz," Elias said, his voice regaining its steel. "We're stopped. Give me a full 360-degree sonar scan. I want to know exactly where we are." "Aye, Captain." Scanning. Diaz worked his controls. The sonar ping, usually a clean, sharp sound, was still muffled, but the images were resolving. "So the bottom here is deep. Deeper than the charts. But the spires are all around us. It's a maze." "And?" Diaz leaned closer to his screen. "What is it?" Elias asked. "Sir, I'm getting targets. Dozens of them. Wrecks. All over the seabed. This is it, Captain. This is the graveyard." Diaz's voice dropped to a whisper. "And there's one directly beneath us. It's big. Looks like a research vessel." Elias felt his heart stop. He stumbled over to the sonar station, pushing Diaz aside. He stared at the green, ghostly image resolving on the screen. It was a ship, broken in two, resting on a deep ledge 800 feet down. The shape of the hull, the specific placement of the communications mast. He knew it instantly. He would know it anywhere. "That's it," Elias breathed, his hand resting on the cold screen. It was the Pioneer. The green, ghostly image of the Pioneer hung on the sonar screen, a tomb 800 feet below. On the bridge of the Ironclad, the silence was heavy, weighted with the dread of what they'd survived and the terrible magnetism of the discovery below. Elias Thorne's grief was a cold, hard knot in his chest, momentarily eclipsing his fear. He had found his father's ship. He had found the end of the mystery. But it wasn't enough. "Prep the Triton," Elias said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I want eyes on that wreck. Now." Ben Carter, still pale, pushed himself out of his chair. "Captain, with all due respect, we just scraped the hull. We don't know the extent of the damage, and we don't know if that thing is still out there. We should back away. Consolidate. Reassess." "We're not moving," Elias snapped, his gaze locked on the sonar. "That song, it stopped when we resisted. It's either gone or it's waiting. Either way, I'm not leaving. Not now. Riley, get Triton in the water." "Aye, Captain," Riley said, nodding, his own fear clearly visible but overridden by duty. The Ironclad was equipped with a mid-size remotely operated vehicle, the Triton, a powerful car-sized drone equipped with high-intensity lights, sonar, and two complex manipulator arms. It was their eyes and hands in the crushing deep. Minutes later, the crew watched on the main view screen as the ROV was lowered from the deployment bay. Camera feed crackled to life, showing the murky, gray-green water of the Strait. "Triton is away," Riley reported, his hands steady on the complex joystick controls. Beginning descent to target. Elias stood directly behind him, watching the screen. The depth gauge on the ROV's display ticked downward. 100 feet. 200 feet. The weak, ambient light of the surface vanished, plunging the ROV into absolute primordial blackness, pierced only by the vehicle's powerful forward-facing lights. The cone of light illuminated a blizzard of marine snow, the constant rain of organic detritus from the world above. It was hypnotic and deeply claustrophobic. Passing 400 feet, Riley said, his voice a low monotone in the quiet bridge. Currents are stable. Watch your tether, Elias cautioned. Already on it, sir. Wait a minute. Riley slowed the ROV's descent. Something on forward sonar? He angled the camera. Out of the blizzard of snow, a shape emerged. It was a mast, stark and black, reaching up like a skeletal hand. They drifted past it. It was an old fishing trawler, its nets tangled around its superstructure like a spider's web. My God, Diaz whispered, looking at his own sonar. They're everywhere. It's not just a graveyard, Captain, it's a cathedral. They're all piled here. Riley grimaced and continued the descent. They passed another wreck, a modern-looking sailboat, its hull split wide open. Then another, an old wooden schooner. All silent. All pointing toward the central point where the Pioneer lay. Passing 750 feet, Riley announced. Seabed in sight. The ROV's lights illuminated the rocky, barren floor of the graveyard Strait. And then there it was. Pioneer was resting on a wide, flat ledge, miraculously intact aside from the massive crack that had broken its spine. It was sitting almost upright, a perfect ghost ship. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. It's clean, Ben noted, his voice full of confusion. There's almost no marine growth. No barnacles. At this depth, after 20 years, it should be covered. Elias had seen it too. The hull was strangely scoured, as if it had been polished. Take us in, Riley, Elias ordered. I want to see the bridge. Riley expertly maneuvered the Triton over the deck. The ship was a time capsule. Elias recognized the custom-made winch his father had installed. He saw the empty lifeboat davits. He felt like a ghost haunting his own past. There's a hull breach near the science lab, Riley said, piloting the ROV toward a dark, jagged hole in the superstructure. It's big enough to fit. Are you sure, Captain? Do it! The Triton slipped through the torn metal into the darkness of the ship's interior. The view switched to the ROV's smaller internal lights. They were in a companionway, the metal walls groaning faintly under the immense pressure. This is wrong, Diaz said, watching the sonar. The interior is messy. The equipment is everywhere. Riley navigated the ROV down the hall, the tether cable unspooling behind it. They passed the galley, where plates and tables were frozen in a chaotic jumble. They reached the science lab. Elias gasped. The lab wasn't just damaged by the sinking. It was destroyed. Heavy-duty electronics were ripped from their mounts. Reinforced sample cases were smashed. Deal tables were overturned. What did this? Ben whispered. The pressure. No, Elias said, his mind racing. This was a frenzy. This was rage. Or panic, Riley added. My father's quarters, Elias said, his voice thick. They're 2 decks up. Can you get there? The stairwell is blocked, Riley said, maneuvering the Triton's camera. But there's a dumbwaiter shaft. It's a tight fit, but I think I can make it. Tension on the bridge was unbearable as they watched the ROV squeeze into the narrow shaft and pull itself upward. It emerged into the senior officer's hallway. They moved past 2 doors before stopping at the one marked Captain J. Thorne. The door was gone, ripped from its hinges. Riley inside, Elias commanded. The ROV glided into the cabin. It was in the same state of violent disarray. The bed was overturned. The desk was smashed to pieces. On the far wall, the small, reinforced steel safe where his father kept his personal logs, it was open. The door was bent outward, as if from an explosion. Or, impossibly, as if it had been forced open from the inside. Elias stared at the empty, dark hole of the safe. The log. It's gone. He took it. He must have tried to escape. Captain. Riley's voice was strained. I don't think he was trying to escape. What do you mean? The desk. The fragments. Look. Riley used the ROV's manipulator arm to gently push aside a piece of the broken desk. Underneath on the steel floor were scratches. Deep gauges, as if carved by a desperate man with a tool. Zoom in, Elias ordered. Camera zoomed. The scratches weren't random. They were notes. A melody. the same looping 5-note sequence carved over and over and over, gouged deep into the metal. "It's the song," Ben breathed, horrified. He was writing it down. He didn't run, Elias realized, the cold truth dawning. He was trapped. He was transcribing. A sudden low-frequency pulse boomed through the Ironclad's hull, making the entire bridge vibrate. "What was that?" Diaz yelled. "It's not on sonar." On the ROV screen, the image flickered. "I'm getting interference, Captain," Riley said, fighting the controls. "Pull Triton back." "Now," Elias shouted. "I'm trying. Something's got the tether." On the screen, the ROV's camera was spinning wildly. It was being pulled deeper into the wreck. "Look," Ben shouted, pointing at the feed. In the last second, before the camera feed dissolved into pure, shrieking static, the Triton's lights flashed on something in the darkest corner of the cabin, something that hadn't been there a moment before. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a creature. It was a shape. A large, dark, pulsating mass that seemed to be unfolding from the bulkhead. And as the feed died, the last sound that came through the ROV's hydrophone was not the song of a human voice. It was the deep, resonant, impossibly beautiful, and utterly terrifying thrum of a single massive string plucked in the deep. The song had returned, and they had just rung the dinner bell. The main view screen was a wall of roaring, blue-white static. The audio feed was a high-pitched shriek that Elias silenced with a single violent stab of a button. The bridge of the Ironclad plunged back into a terrifying, pressurized silence. Riley tore his headset off and threw it onto the console. "Tether's gone. It's severed. The hydraulics are reading 0 pressure." "It didn't just break the line, Captain. Pulled it. It took the entire ROV." Diaz was as white as a sheet, his eyes darting between the sonar, which was now clear again, and the depth gauge. 800 feet. "Captain, that mass, it unfolded. It was in the bulkhead. Like it was part of the ship." Ben Carter was backing toward the reinforced bridge door, his hand gripping a wrench from the emergency toolkit. "That's it. We're done. We are done. We found the ship. We found what's down there. It's a monster, Elias. It's a predator, and we just rang its doorbell with $1 million piece of equipment." "Calm down, Carter," Elias said, his voice dangerously low. But he wasn't looking at Ben. He was staring at the static-filled screen, his mind replaying the image of the 5 musical notes carved into his father's cabin floor. "Calm down," Ben's voice cracked. "Did you not see that thing? We are a salvage vessel, not a warship. We have nothing to fight that. It's waited 20 years for a new meal. I am not going to be on the menu. We have to go. We have to warn someone." "He's right, Captain," Diaz joined in, his voice shaking. "We're damaged. We're in a maze of rocks. That thing is down there, and it knows we're here. We have to try and make it back to Port Beacon." Elias turned, his eyes cold. The man of logic, the skeptic who had come to bust a myth, was gone. In his place was a different man, a hunter, cornered and furious. "We're not running," Elias said. "Captain, that's insane," Ben shouted. "It took my father," Elias whispered, walking toward the helm. "It took my ROV. Thinks it can just take what it wants. It thinks it can scare us off. It can," Ben insisted. "No." Elias gripped the helm. "We came for an answer. The answer isn't that a monster exists. The answer is what it is and how to stop it. We are a state-of-the-art research vessel, Mr. Carter. We are going to research it." Before Ben could argue, a low, deep boom vibrated through the hull. It was not an impact. It was a pulse. The same deep, instrumental thrum they had heard from the ROV, but 100 times magnified. The mugs of coffee on the console rattled, and a fine dust shook loose from the ceiling panels. "What was that?" Riley yelped, grabbing his station. Diaz was staring at his sonar screen in disbelief. "Sir, that was a sonar pulse. But it wasn't ours. And the frequency it's biological. It's massive. It just pinged us. Boom. This time it was stronger." The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging them into darkness before the red emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a hellish glow. "We've lost the main generator," Riley shouted, switching to auxiliary. It's not just a pulse, Diaz said, his hands flying over his console trying to reboot the system. It's resonance. It's tuning itself to us. That first pulse was a question. This is the answer. Boom. A violent jolt threw them all sideways. An alarm screamed to life, the engine room. Starboard engine is offline. Riley yelled, reading the diagnostics. The pulse, it's not an EMP, it's a kinetic force. It's using focused sound to attack our systems. It's smart, Elias breathed, a sort of terrible awe in his voice. It's not just a brute. It's a tactician. It's crippling us. The ship was dead in the water. The song of the Sirens wasn't just a lure for the mind. It was a weapon against steel. Ben Carter stared at the floor. My mother's voice, your father's call, that was the lure. That was the trap. But this is the jaw. Boom. This pulse was different. Softer. But it was followed by a long, scraping shriek of metal on metal that ran the entire length of the portside hull. It's moving, Diaz whispered, his eyes on the hydrophones. It's outside. It's on the hull. Elias grabbed the controls for the external floodlights and slammed them on. Powerful lights cut through the fog and the darkness, illuminating the gray water around the ship, but they could see nothing. Nothing on the cameras, Riley reported, his voice a tight wire. Whatever it is, it's staying just outside the light. But the hydrophones, sir, you need to hear this. Diaz switched the audio feed to the main speakers. It was not the thrum. It was not the song. It was a slow, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Elias listened, his blood running cold. He recognized it. It was the same rhythm. The same notes. The music his father had carved into the floor of his cabin. Tap, 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 tap. It's communicating, Elias said. It's mocking us, Ben corrected, his face ashen. Then a new sound. A heavy, wet thud from directly above them. And another. Something was on the deck. Riley, get me the aft deck camera, Elias ordered, his voice barely a whisper. Riley's fingers flew. Camera feed switched, showing the rain-slicked, fog-shrouded rear deck of the Ironclad. First, there was nothing. Just the fog and the empty deck. There's nothing, Riley started to say. Wait, Elias said, pointing. In the center of the camera's view, something was lying on the deck plating. It was dark and coiled and wet. It was the severed end of the Triton's fiber-optic tether. As they watched, a new shape emerged from the fog at the edge of the ship. It was not the pulsating mass from below. It was something different. Something smaller. It was tall and impossibly thin, silhouetted against the fog. Moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. It looked, for all the world, like a human being, soaked and drowned, its limbs bending at angles that were entirely wrong. The figure stopped, turned, and looked directly at the camera. It had no face. Only a smooth, pale, porcelain-like mask. And then, from the ship's speakers, a new sound began. Not a thrum. Not a tap. Clear, perfect, human voice singing the five-note melody. The creature on the deck opened its mouth, and the voice of Elias's father came out. You shouldn't have come back, son. They don't like to be disturbed. The voice of Jacob Thorne, dead for 20 years, echoed across the bridge, clear and conversational, coming from the impossible figure on the aft camera. You shouldn't have come back, son. They don't like to be disturbed. No one breathed. Ben Carter, who had been ready to fight a monster, looked utterly broken. This was not a monster. This was a ghost, wearing the voice of a man he'd respected. Turn it off, Ben whispered, his voice trembling. Elias, turn the audio off. No, Elias said. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was staring at the screen, at the thing that wore his father's voice. I want to hear every word. The figure on the deck, the drowned mask, tilted its head as if listening to a faraway sound. Its movements were fluid and wrong, like a marionette controlled by unsteady hands. It was impossibly tall and slender, wrapped in what looked like rotted, soaked canvas, but the porcelain mask was the worst part. It was smooth, white, and featureless, save for the dark round hole where a mouth should be. Took a step, its bare, gray feet slapping wetly on the steel deck. You were always the stubborn one, Elias, the voice continued, full of a sad paternal disappointment. Always had to poke the hornet's nest. I told you to stay away from the sea. Doesn't love us, son. It collects us. It's not him, Elias said, his fist clenching and unclenching. It's a parrot. A mimic. It's standing on our deck, Captain, Riley countered, his panic rising. What do? We can't shoot it. Riley, the deck wash system, Elias ordered, his eyes never leaving the screen. High pressure. Full blast. I want to see if it can swim. Riley's fingers flew over a secondary console. Activating now. They heard a heavy clank as the pumps engaged, followed by a hydraulic whine that sputtered and died. The system offline light blinked red. The pulse, Riley said. The last pulse, it targeted our auxiliary systems. Pumps are dead, Captain. We have no fire suppression. No deck wash. We're blind out there except for the cameras. The drowned mask, as if it had heard them, turned. It was no longer looking at the camera. It was walking with that same disjointed, drifting gait toward the starboard side of the ship, where the primary engine housing was located. It knows, Diaz whispered, horrified. It knows exactly where we're crippled. It's a saboteur. We sang for him, you know, the voice said, its tone conversational as the creature approached the engine housing. Your father. He was strong. He resisted for days. He locked himself in his cabin. He carved the song into the floor, thinking he could understand it, as if a mouse could understand the hawk. Shut up, Elias hissed at the monitor. Creature reached the housing. It raised a long gray hand, its fingers impossibly long and thin. With no apparent effort, it punched its hand through the reinforced steel casing as if it were wet cardboard. Sparks erupted. Alarms blared on the bridge. It's in the main conduit, Riley yelled. It's ripping out the wiring. We're losing everything. Auxiliary power is gone. We're on emergency batteries only. The red emergency lights on the bridge died, plunging them into absolute darkness for a split second before the final battery-powered backup strips clicked on, casting a dim, sickly green glow over the consoles. The main view screen showing the drowned mask went black. It cut the cameras, Diaz said, his voice a strained whisper in the dark. It doesn't matter, Ben said, his voice hollow. It's finished. We're completely dead. We're just food in a can. Silence. The ship was utterly still, its engines dead, its generators offline. The only sound was the faint lapping of water against the hull and the frantic breathing of the 4 men on the bridge. Then, boom. The massive pulse from below returned, slamming the ship with the force of a wrecking ball. The hull screamed. It's the big one, Diaz choked out, clutching his console. It's trying to crack the hull. Boom. A new alarm, this one high-pitched and frantic. Hull breach, Riley shouted. Deck 3. Cargo bay. We're taking on water. Seal it, Elias roared. I can't. Riley was almost in tears. The power is gone. The watertight doors are manual, and it's on the other side of the bridge door. The thing on the deck. It wasn't on the deck anymore. A slow, wet slapping sound came from the corridor just outside the bridge. Slap, slap, slap. It was coming closer. They all stared, frozen, at the reinforced steel door. The slapping stopped. A long, agonizing silence. Elias grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall, the only weapon he had. Then a new sound. A gentle tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was tapping the 5-note melody on their door. Let me in, Elias, his father's voice cooed, muffled by the steel. It's cold out here. I just want to talk. I have a message. From them. Go to hell, Elias spat, standing between the door and his crew. There is no hell, son. There is only the deep. And the song. They are very impressed with you. You resisted. Not many can do that. They have a proposition. An offering. The tapping stopped. A new sound began. A high-pitched, resonant whine. The steel door began to vibrate, the locking pins rattling in their sockets. It's the resonance, Diaz whispered, backing away. It's tuning itself to the door. It's going to shake it apart. Back! Everyone to the far bulkhead! Elias yelled, dragging Ben with him. The whining noise grew, climbing the scale, reaching a pitch that was pure physical pain. The men clamped their hands over their ears. Then a violent bang. Not the door. The viewport. They all spun around. The drowned mask was outside, clinging to the side of the bridge, its horrifying blank face pressed against the 3-inch thick reinforced glass. It had scaled the ship's superstructure, stared in at them, its featureless face seeming to find Elias in the gloom. It raised one of its gray, skeletal hands and pressed its palm flat against the glass. It opened its round, black mouth. The voice that came out was not Jacob Thorne's. It was a shriek. A sound so high and so powerful that the air itself seemed to tear. It was the sound of 1,000 Arius blended with the shriek of dying metal. A hairline fracture, a spider's web of cracked glass, exploded across the viewport. The drowned mask shrieked again, and the glass began to buckle. The shriek of the drowned mask was a physical spear of sound, and the reinforced viewport, already fractured, could not withstand it. With a sound like a cannon shot, the glass exploded inward. A hurricane of wind, freezing fog, and needle-sharp shards of glass blasted the bridge. Diaz and Riley screamed, throwing their arms up to protect their faces. The dim, battery-powered emergency lights were snuffed out by the force of the gale, plunging the room into near-total blackness, illuminated only by the roiling fog outside. The drowned mask did not climb through the shattered frame. It poured, flowed over the broken sill like a creature of oil and shadow, its tall, thin frame unfolding in the cramped space. The shriek stopped. In the sudden, howling silence, it raised its head. The featureless, porcelain face seemed to glow faintly in the gloom. Took a wet, sliding step toward Elias. So cold. His father's voice gasped, a terrible, wet, choking sound. Elias, help me, it's so dark. The thing was 10 feet away. Ben Carter was paralyzed, backed against the wall, shaking. Riley and Diaz were on the floor, tangled in their chairs. Elias did not hesitate. He had faced the ghost in his head. This was just flesh, or whatever passed for it. He roared, a wordless sound of pure defiance, and aimed the fire extinguisher. He depressed the handle. A massive, screaming cloud of pressurized CO2 and chemical foam erupted from the nozzle, slamming into the creature's chest. The effect was immediate and violent. The drowned mask did not recoil. Convulsed. Threw its head back and a new sound ripped from its round, black mouth. Not a shriek, not a human voice, but a high-pitched, agonized squeal like a dying rabbit mixed with a steam whistle. Where the freezing CO2 touched its pale, gray skin, it didn't just frost. Smoked. Sizzled, as if the creature was not made of water, but of acid. The thing staggered back, its long arms flailing, its faceless head turning wildly. It was blind and in agony. Scrambled backward, clumsy and frantic, and tumbled back out the broken viewport, vanishing into the fog. A stunned, deafening silence filled the bridge, broken only by the howl of the wind through the new, gaping hole and the frantic, high-pitched beeping of a new alarm. My God, Ben Carter panted, sliding down the bulkhead. You heard it. I don't think so, Elias said, his voice grim, lowering the extinguisher. I think I just made it angry. He looked around the ruined bridge. Water and fog were already coating every surface. Bridge is compromised. We're abandoning it. Diaz pulled himself up, his hand bleeding from a glass shard. Captain! That new alarm, it's the bilge. The breach on deck 3. The pumps are offline, the water is rising. Fast. The ship is listing 10 degrees to port. It's sinking us, Riley said, his voice hollow. The big one below is breaking the hull and the other thing is up here hurting us. Then we stop being sheep, Elias said. He grabbed a heavy, battery-powered flashlight from its charging port and thumbed it on. Powerful beam cut through the gloom. The emergency gear locker. Deck 2 amidships. It's in a reinforced compartment. It has the survival suits, the APER beacons, and the flare guns. Deck 2, Ben said, standing up, his fear being replaced by a frantic energy. How do we get there? We can't go out that way, he motioned to the broken window. The interior door, Elias said, pointing. Riley, Diaz, grabbed the medical kit. Ben, you're with me. We stay together, we move fast, and we don't make a sound. That thing is still on the ship. Elias moved to the main bridge door, the one leading to the interior companionway. He put his hand on the latch. "Captain," Diaz whispered, his eyes on the dead sonar screen. The big one. The thrummer. It's gone quiet again. I don't like it. It's listening." As if in answer, the entire ship groaned. A deep, tectonic shifting of stressed metal that made the deck tilt another 5 degrees, throwing them all against the consoles. "Now!" Elias yelled. He threw the latch and pulled the heavy steel door open, shining his flashlight beam into the corridor. It was dark. The emergency lights were dead here. The ship's new, sickening angle made the hallway look like a surrealist nightmare. Water was dripping from the ceiling, and a low, gurgling sound was coming from the stairwell, the sound of the Atlantic pouring into the decks below. "Move!" Elias ordered, pushing Ben out ahead of him. They spilled into the corridor, a tight, terrified huddle. Diaz, Riley, Ben, with Elias taking the rear, his fire extinguisher held at the ready. "The stairwell is 20 yards ahead to the left," Elias said, his voice a low command. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and illuminated the drowned mask, standing at the far end of the corridor, blocking the stairwell. It was just standing there, unmoving, its head tilted, that blank porcelain face aimed directly at them. The CO2 burns were already healing, the smoking flesh sealing over with a pale new skin. "It knew," Riley choked out. "It knew where we were going." "You can't run, Elias." His father's voice echoed down the hall, impossibly, coming from the creature and from the walls themselves. "It's all one. The ship, the water, us. We are all part of the song now." A new sound. From behind them. Slap, slap, slap. Elias spun around, his flashlight beam catching a second figure. Another drowned mask, identical to the first, was crawling out of a ceiling ventilation duct, its limbs bending backward as it dropped to the deck, blocking their retreat to the bridge. They were trapped. Caught in the steel maze, with a monster at either end of the hall. Elias's flashlight beam reflected off the two identical, pale, featureless faces. Corridor, already tilted and slick with seawater, felt like it was shrinking. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the deep, wet chill of the grave. Then the chorus began. But from the monster in front, his father's voice, now devoid of all warmth, flat and dead. "It's over, Elias. The ship is ours. Your crew is ours. Join us. It doesn't hurt." From the monster behind them, a new voice. A soft, gentle female voice. Ben Carter, who had been steeling himself, let out a choked sob. Benjamin, baby, why are you running? So warm down here. I've been waiting for you." "It's not her, Ben," Elias roared, grabbing Ben's jacket. "It's a lie. It's a trap." The two drowned masks took a simultaneous, gliding step forward. Slap, slap. Pincer was closing. "Riley, Diaz on me," Elias yelled. He was scanning the corridor walls with his light. Cabins, closets, and there, a steel door marked, Lab 3 Specimen Analysis. "In here? Now," he commanded. Riley, closest to the door, grabbed the handle. "It's locked. Standard maglock, but the power's dead. It's just a deadbolt." "Stand back." Elias hefted the fire extinguisher. He still had a single short blast of CO2 left, but the heavy steel canister was now a battering ram. He swung it, slamming the metal base directly against the lock mechanism. The sound was deafening in the narrow hall. The lock held. The masks were getting closer. 10 yards. 8 yards. "Don't fight, son. It's so much easier if you don't fight." "Again!" Elias yelled, and he and Ben swung the extinguisher together. Crunch. The lock mechanism shattered and the door flew open, slamming against the inside wall. "Inside. Get inside." Elias shoved Riley and Diaz through the doorway. Ben scrambled after them. Elias backed in, his flashlight beam fixed on the two advancing creatures. They didn't speed up. They just came, relentless and steady. Elias slammed the steel door shut and threw the heavy manual deadbolt. They were in pitch darkness. "Captain, the lights." Riley's voice was shaking. Elias flicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the black. They were in a science lab. The air was thick with the sharp chemical smell of formaldehyde. The room was lined with shelves, and on those shelves were dozens of glass jars. In the jars, illuminated by the bobbing flashlight beam, were pale, coiled deep-sea specimens, anglerfish with dead, milky eyes, translucent squids, and long, white, ribbon-like worms. A heavy boom slammed against the door, making the entire bulkhead shake. The deadbolt held. "They're here," Diaz whispered, backing away, his eyes wide with terror. Boom. Another impact. Not a fist. A body. Creature was throwing its full weight against the door. Then the other one joined in. A rhythmic double impact. Boom. 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 "They're going to break it down," Ben said, his voice numb. "We're trapped." "No, we're not," Elias said, sweeping his light across the room. He was a captain. He knew his ship's blueprints by heart. "That wall," he pointed to the far side of the lab. "Behind that specimen rack, there's a vertical maintenance shaft. It runs all the way from the bridge to the engine room." They scrambled over, Elias and Ben tearing the heavy shelf of dead specimens away from the wall. Crashed to the floor in a shower of broken glass and stinking formaldehyde. There it was. A square steel plate 2 feet by 2 feet with a heavy rusted dog wheel in the center. "This is it," Elias said. "It'll take us down to deck 2. Right above the emergency locker." He grabbed the wheel and pulled. It didn't budge. It seized. Rusted shut. Crack. They all spun around. A long, vertical split had appeared in the lab door. The wood was splintering. "Ben! Help me!" Elias yelled. Ben and Elias both gripped the wheel, planting their feet on the slick, formaldehyde-covered floor. "On 3!" Elias shouted. 1, 2, 3. They threw their entire weight against it. The wheel screamed, a high-pitched shriek of metal on metal, and turned agonizingly 1 inch. Crack. A long, gray, skeletal hand punched through the center of the door, its thin fingers wiggling, searching for the deadbolt. "Again!" Elias roared. They pulled again. The wheel turned. The hand in the door found the deadbolt. Began to slide it back. "Diaz! Riley! Get that thing off the lock!" Diaz, in a blind panic, grabbed a heavy, empty gas cylinder from a rack and smashed it against the hand. Creature didn't even flinch. The bolt slid back. Breach. The maintenance hatch wheel gave way, and the heavy steel door swung open, revealing a dark, cold, vertical shaft filled with pipes and a narrow, steel-rung ladder. The smell of the ocean and the rising floodwaters wafted up from below. "The lock's undone!" Ben yelled. The lab door burst open. The 2 drowned masks stood in the doorway, silhouetted, their blank faces identical, their heads tilted. "Go!" Elias screamed. Riley and Diaz didn't hesitate. They dove into the shaft, their feet finding the rungs. Ben scrambled in after them. Elias was last. He turned, raised the fire extinguisher, and gave the 2 creatures one last defiant blast. The meager puff of CO2 was just enough to make them hiss and recoil for a split second. It was all he needed. Elias threw himself backward into the dark shaft, grabbing the rungs. "Close the hatch." "Close it," Ben yelled from below him. Elias grabbed the inner handle and pulled the heavy steel hatch shut, just as the 2 creatures lunged. A gray hand was caught in the seam, its fingers splayed, but Elias threw his weight against the hatch. With a sound like a snapping carrot, the fingers broke and the hatch slammed shut. He spun the inner wheel, locking it. They were in total darkness. The only sound was the frantic breathing of the 4 men, the drip, drip, drip of water from the pipes, and from far below, the deep, gurgling roar of the Atlantic, filling the hull of their dying ship. They were in a vertical grave, and the only way out was down. The darkness in the maintenance shaft was absolute. It was a cold, pressing, metallic blackness, heavier than any night. The only sounds were the 4 men gasping for air, the steady, frantic drip, drip, drip of condensation, and the distant, hungry roar of the Atlantic, gurgling its way into the ship's belly far below. Boom! A heavy, muffled impact slammed against the steel hatch above them, making the entire shaft vibrate. The rungs of the ladder hummed under their hands. It's trying to get in," Riley whispered, his voice trembling so hard it barely formed words. "That's a steel hatch. How?" "Don't think about it," Elias's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the dark. A second later, his flashlight clicked on. Powerful beams shot down, illuminating their escape route. It was a nightmare. The shaft was a narrow, vertical ribcage of pipes, cables, and conduit, dropping straight into blackness. The steel rungs of the ladder were slick with seawater and rust. The ship's 15-degree list was even more pronounced here. The ladder was tilted sideways, forcing them to climb at an awkward, muscle-burning angle. Far below, at the edge of the flashlight's beam, they could see a dark, swirling mass. Water. Boom. Another, heavier impact from above. A visible, circular dent appeared in the center of the hatch. "It's breaking through," Ben said, his voice flat with terror. "Then we move," Elias ordered. "Diaz, you're first." "Go." Riley, then Ben. "I'm right behind you. One rung at a time. Do not look down. Do not look up. Just climb. Go." Diaz, shaking, swallowed his fear and began the descent. His boots clanged nervously on the steel rungs. Riley followed, then Ben. Elias started last, his flashlight beam pointing down to light their way, his other hand gripping the fire extinguisher, now useless as anything but a club. They descended into the cold, damp dark. The roar of the floodwaters grew louder with every rung. Boom. Crack. A terrible metallic tearing sound from above. It's using the resonance," Diaz yelled up, his voice echoing in the shaft. "It's vibrating the lock." "Don't stop," Elias shouted. "Faster." They were 30 feet down, halfway to the next level when the other enemy attacked. A deep, bone-jarring thrum pulse from below them. The thrummer, the massive entity in the water, had found them. The entire ship lurched violently to port. The shaft twisted. A thick, rust-caked pipe to their left, stressed beyond its limit, burst. A high-pressure jet of freezing, oily bilge water slammed into Diaz, who was lowest on the ladder. "AHHs!" he screamed, his boots slipping on the now gushing rung. He lost his grip. Diaz fell. "No!" Ben, who was directly above him, let go with one hand and made a desperate lunge, grabbing the back of Diaz's jacket. The force of the catch almost pulled Ben from the ladder. His arm was nearly ripped from its socket, but he held on, his muscles screaming. Diaz dangled in the dark, swinging wildly, his feet scrabbling for purchase. I got him. I got him," Ben grunted, the strain agonizing. "I can't pull him up." "Hold on." Elias climbed down past Riley, bracing himself. He hooked one arm around a rung, aimed the flashlight at Diaz, and leaned down. "Diaz! Swing! Grab the ladder! Grab my boot! Anything!" Diaz, choking on the spray, swung his body. His hand found a rung. He was back on. For a second, they all just hung there, panting, soaked and freezing. "See," Elias panted, his voice a raw grate. "We don't die. Not yet. Now move." They scrambled the last 10 feet, their adrenaline surging. They reached the next landing, another square, steel hatch identical to the one above. "This is it," Elias panted, shining the light on the wheel. "Deck 2. The locker is just outside." "Diaz, get the hatch." Diaz, still shaking, grabbed the wheel and pulled. It didn't move. It's stuck. The frame, it must be warped from the last pulse." "Let me try," Ben said, pushing past him. He and Elias both grabbed the wheel and threw their combined weight against it. It didn't budge. It was hopelessly jammed. "It's no good," Ben yelled, smashing his fist against the steel. It's jammed solid. We're trapped in here." A deafening crash echoed from above. Elias aimed his flashlight up the shaft. The lab hatch, 20 yards above them, was gone. It had been ripped from its hinges and tossed aside like tin foil. In the dark, square opening, a pale, faceless head leaned in. The drowned mask looked down, its blank face catching the beam of Elias's light. It opened its round, black mouth. "Nowhere left to run, Elias," his father's voice, amplified by the shaft, boomed down at them. And then it let go. It didn't climb. It fell. Dropped, a silent, pale, spider-like shape, hurtling down the shaft, straight toward them. The drowned mask was a pale, streamlined blur, dropping through the darkness, its long limbs tucked in, its faceless head aimed directly at the top of the human chain. It was aiming for Elias. There was no time to think. Only to act. "Diaz! Ben! Riley! Elias bellowed, his voice echoing in the terrible confined space. The hatch. Kick it. Kick it open. Now. Below him, the three men, spurred by the new immediate terror, understood. They stopped trying to turn the wheel and began to kick in unison, their heavy work boots slamming against the warped steel hatch. The sound was a frantic, desperate thud thud thud. Elias braced himself, hooking one arm through a rung and raised the heavy fire extinguisher with the other, his flashlight beam blindingly fixed on the descending nightmare. The mask hit him. The impact was not a crash but a wet, sickening thwack. Creature was impossibly strong. Its gray, skeletal limbs as strong as steel cables wrapped around Elias, pinning his arms, trying to rip him from the ladder. Its weight and the impact sent a jarring shock down the entire ladder, nearly shaking the others loose. Elias roared, a sound of pure rage, and fought back. He was pinned, but his extinguisher arm was partially free. He slammed the heavy steel canister sideways, smashing it into the creature's head. Pale, porcelain-like face cracked. A web of black fissures spider-webbed from the point of impact. But it didn't bleed. It didn't flinch. Just hissed, a sound like a punctured tire, and tightened its grip. The pressure on Elias's chest was immense. His ribs felt like they were about to crack. The mask opened its round, black mouth, inches from his face, preparing to unleash the glass-shattering shriek that had broken the bridge. "No, you don't," Elias snarled. He jammed the nozzle of the fire extinguisher into the creature's open mouth, a desperate, impossible gamble. The mask gagged. Its body convulsed. In the chaotic struggle, Elias's hand, slick with oily water, slipped from the flashlight. It fell. The beam pinwheeled wildly, a strobe light of pure panic, illuminating the fight in mad, disjointed flashes. Elias's grimacing face, the mask's cracked head, the frantic kicking of the men below. Then, the flashlight was gone, tumbling down into the blackness, swallowed by the roaring, swirling water at the bottom of the shaft. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sounds were the thud-thud-thud of the kicking below, the wet, strangled hissing of the drowned mask as it tried to dislodge the extinguisher from its throat, and Elias's own panted grunts as he fought to stay conscious, to maintain his grip on the ladder with one arm while being crushed to death. Then, a new sound from above. A light thud and a metallic clang. The second drowned mask had just landed on the rungs at the top of the shaft. "Elias!" Ben screamed, hearing it. There's another one. It's coming down." In the dark, Elias could hear it, a faint, wet slap-slap as it began its descent toward him. He was trapped between them. The hatch! Elias used his last breath to roar. Thud! Thud! Kick! Keryank! With a sound of tearing, screaming metal, the warped hatch below them burst open. The locking mechanism, never designed to withstand the synchronized, desperate kicking of three grown men, shattered. Diaz, Riley, and Ben, who had been braced against the ladder, fell through the opening, tumbling out onto the corridor of Deck 2 in a chaotic heap. They had landed in 2 inches of sloshing, icy seawater. The dim, green emergency lights of this corridor were still working, casting a sickly pall over everything. We're out," Diaz gasped, scrambling to his feet. Ben, his heart pounding, spun back toward the open, black square of the shaft. "Captain Elias, grab my hand." He thrust his arm into the darkness. He saw him. In the faint green light from the hallway, Elias was still on the ladder, not 10 feet above. He had lost his grip. The first drowned mask was still wrapped around him, a pale parasite. The second mask was only a few rungs above them, its faceless head turning, sensing the new opening. Elias was struggling, his boots sliding on the wet rungs. He tried to reach for Ben's hand, his face a mask of straining agony. He couldn't make it. His grip was gone. He looked at Ben, his eyes wide in the green gloom. It wasn't a look of terror. It was a look of command. "The locker?" Elias grunted. "Get the flares." Then he let go. He didn't just fall. He pushed, wrapping his own legs around the drowned mask, locking them both together. Final defiant act. "No!" Ben screamed. Elias Thorne and the monster that held him fell together. They plunged past the opening, a tangled, two-bodied shape, and vanished into the roaring, watery darkness at the bottom of the shaft. For a second, the only sound was Ben's cry. Then, from the shaft above, the second drowned mask stopped at the opening, its pale, blank face peering out at the three survivors, tilted its head. And then it too dropped. Not onto them, but past them into the dark, joining its brother and Elias in the flooded bowels of the ship. Elias! Ben's scream was raw, tearing from his throat. The name echoed down the black, vertical shaft, swallowed instantly by the roaring gurgle of the floodwaters below. There was no answer. Just the hollow, final sound of the sea reclaiming its own. Ben hung in the opening, his arms still outstretched, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes had just seen. The captain, Elias, he was gone. He had sacrificed himself, taking the monster with him, buying them what? Seconds? Ben, get back. Diaz grabbed the back of Ben's jacket and hauled him, stumbling, out of the shaft and onto the slick, tilted floor of the Deck 2 corridor. He's gone. Ben, they're gone. Riley, shaking, slammed his fist against the bulkhead. Why? Why did the second one, why did it follow them? It could have finished us. Diaz, his mind racing, leaned back against the wall, his chest heaving. I don't think they're just killers. They're retrievers. That's what Elias was. He was resistance. He was new. Maybe it couldn't kill him. So it took him to the big one. A new, colder horror settled on Ben, eclipsing his grief. The thought of Elias alive down there in the dark in the water with those things. He pushed the thought away. He stumbled to his feet, the dim green emergency lights of the corridor casting long, sick shadows on his face, streaked with grime and oily water. His shock was crystallizing, hardening into something new. Cold, bitter resolve. He's gone, Ben said, his voice quiet dead. But he left us in order. He looked at the other two men. Diaz, the smart one, now pale and shaking. Riley, the tech, looking utterly broken. They were looking at him. He was all that was left. Chain of command had fallen to him. He left us a mission, Ben said, his voice gaining a hard, thin edge of command that surprised even himself. The locker. Get the flares. That's what he said. He turned and looked down the dark, tilted corridor. The ship's list was worse here, a 20-degree angle that made the floor a steep, treacherous ramp. Water was sloshing in the low-lying port side, 2 inches deep. Diaz, you have the med kit? Diaz fumbled at his belt. Yes, I still have it. Riley, stay with me. Diaz, you take the rear. We are not running. We move fast, we move quiet. We get the flares. We find the life raft. We get off this ship. Understood. They both just nodded, their eyes wide. Go, Ben ordered. He led the way. There was no flashlight. They moved through the dim, green-lit nightmare, their hands on the bulkhead to brace themselves. The ship was a symphony of agony. The metallic groan of the hull bending under the pressure. The hiss of ruptured pipes. And underneath it all, the constant gurgling slosh of the ocean somewhere inside the walls below their feet. They passed a stairwell leading down to the flooded Deck 3. As they did, a wave of black, oily water suddenly surged up the steps, splashing around their ankles before receding like the tide. Riley whimpered. It's breathing. The ship or the water, it's the thrummer, Diaz whispered from behind. The big one. It's in the ship now. In the flooded decks. It's moving. Every time it moves, it's like a tide. Ben's blood ran cold. They were walking on a thin, steel skin, and just beneath it, the monster that commanded the others. Keep moving, Ben said, his voice tighter. Don't stop. Another 20 yards. Corridor was blocked by a heavy tangle of sparking electrical cables that had fallen from the ceiling. Don't touch them, Riley said, his tech instincts kicking in. They're shorting in the water. That's 440 volts. It'll kill us. We can't go back, Diaz said, looking over his shoulder. We go over, Ben said. He pointed at the ceiling. The cable trays. They're high enough. Go. One by one, they climbed, pulling themselves up and over the deadly, sparking nest of wires, their muscles burning from the effort. They dropped, soaking and exhausted, on the other side. And there it was. A heavy, reinforced steel door, stenciled in yellow, Emergency Survival Gear Locker 2B. It was sealed with a heavy, circular wheel, just like the hatches. Ben felt a spike of pure dread. "Please," he whispered and grabbed the wheel. It was stiff. "It's stuck," Riley said, his voice cracking, the parallel to the shaft almost too much to bear. "No, it's not," Ben yelled, planting his foot on the bulkhead. "It's just heavy." He threw his entire desperate weight against it. With a high-pitched, rusty screech that echoed down the hall, the wheel turned. The locks disengaged. Ben grabbed the latch and hauled the heavy door open. A single white emergency light flickered on inside the locker. It was dry. It was safe. And it was full. Racks of bright orange insulated survival suits. Shelves of self-heating meal packs. Water purification tablets. First aid supplies. And on the back wall, 2 APERB beacons and a heavy green metal box. The stencil on the side read, "Flare gun, 12-gauge high-intensity magnesium." We made it," Diaz breathed, a small, hysterical laugh escaping him. "We actually made it." Ben reached into the locker, his hands shaking, his fingers brushing the cold, painted metal of the flare box. This was it. This was the hope Elias had died for. As his hand closed around the handle, a new sound began. Drifted from the dark, ruined corridor they had just come from. Came from the direction of the stairwell, the one the black water had surged from. It was not a shriek. It was not a thrum. It was not a voice. It was the song. The original, complex, terrifyingly beautiful melody. The Devil's Choir. It was faint at first, a single impossibly pure note, then a harmony weaving its way through the groaning metal. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't a memory. It was live. And it was very, very close. The siren itself was no longer just a pulse in the deep. It was hunting them. The melody was perfect. It was not a sound that entered the ears, it was a frequency that vibrated the soul. Ben Carter froze, his hand on the cold green metal of the flare box. Beside him, Diaz and Riley, who had been scrambling for the survival suits, stopped, their movements frozen. The groaning of the dying ship, the gurgle of the floodwaters, the hiss of the shorting wires, all of it faded, replaced by this impossible liquid harmony. It was the sound of all things being right, the sound of an end to fear. Ben saw it. He wasn't on a sinking ship. He was home. In his old childhood house in Vermont. It was snowing outside, but the fireplace was lit. His mother, 20 years younger, was in the kitchen, humming, the smell of baking bread in the air. She was alive. She was safe. "Ben, baby, you're home," her voice whispered, not in his ears, but in the center of his mind. "You've been gone so long. So cold. Come inside. It's warm here. Just come to the fire." Ben let out a sigh, a sound of profound relief. The terror of the last few hours, it was just a bad dream. He dropped his hand from the flare box. He took a step out of the locker, back into the corridor. It wasn't a dark, tilted hallway. It was the living room. The stairwell where the music was coming from, that was the kitchen. He just had to go to the kitchen. Beside him, Riley was weeping, tears of pure joy streaming down his face. My apartment," he whispered, a blissful smile on his lips. It's not flooded. Sarah, she didn't leave. She's waiting for me. I have to go home." He too began to walk. Diaz was the most still. He stood rigid, his head tilted, his glasses reflecting the dim green light. He wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing everything. "It's the code," Diaz whispered, his voice full of a terrible, ecstatic awe. The anomaly. It's not a monster, it's a language. The music, it's the source code of the universe. Can see the equations. They're beautiful. The answer, it's right there. I just have to listen." He too took a step, a sleepwalker drawn by an unseen gravity. All 3 of them lost. 3 survivors about to walk willingly into the arms of the predator, convinced they were going home. But as Ben took his 3rd step, his boot kicked something on the floor. It was the heavy flashlight Elias had dropped, then grabbed again before the shaft. No, that wasn't right. Elias was the image of his captain, his face a mask of grim determination as he let go and fell into the blackness, shattered the illusion. Elias wasn't at peace. He was fighting. His last words, "Get the flares." The fantasy of the warm kitchen ripped apart. Ben was back. He was in the cold. He was in the dark. And he was furious. "It's a lie!" Ben roared, the words tearing from his throat. But his shout didn't break the spell. Riley and Diaz kept walking, their faces serene, their eyes glassy and unfocused. They were 10 feet from the stairwell, where the music was swelling, a rapturous, welcoming crescendo. Ben spun back to the locker. He didn't have time. He couldn't shake them both awake. He had to break the source. He ripped the green metal box from the shelf. Flares. He tore the latch open. Inside, nestled in foam, was a bright orange pistol-grip 12-gauge flare gun and a dozen thick red wax-sealed cartridges. His hands were shaking, clumsy with adrenaline. He grabbed the gun. He grabbed a cartridge. He broke the barrel, shoved the shell in, snapped it shut. It was a single shot. He had one chance. He aimed, not at his friends, but past them, into the stairwell, into the heart of the beautiful, terrible sound. "For Elias!" he screamed and pulled the trigger. The bang of the 12-gauge was deafening in the narrow corridor. It was followed by a WHOSH cartridge shot down the hall, and as it entered the stairwell, it ignited. Did not create a red light. Created a sun. A blinding, white-hot magnesium sun. Corridor, which had been in dim green shadow, was instantly, painfully, illuminated in a light so bright it was like an atomic flash. The effect was immediate and total. The music, the psychic, beautiful melody, stopped. It didn't fade. It was cut as if by a knife. Diaz and Riley, their minds violently severed from the illusion, collapsed. They screamed, clutching their heads, the sudden sensory shock of the light and the silence overwhelming them. But it was the sound from the stairwell that stopped Ben's heart. The song was gone, replaced by a shriek. It was not the high-pitched squeal of the drowned masks. This was a sound from the depths of the earth. A deep, wet, bubbling, agonized roar. A sound of something ancient and vast and in pain. The magnesium flare, still burning with the light of a star, had landed on the landing of the stairwell, illuminating the source. Ben, Diaz, and Riley, their eyes adjusting, stared in horror. It was not a creature. It was a mass. The thrummer itself. It had poured up the stairwell from the flooded decks. It was a pulsating, dark, glistening thing, a living tide of black, ropey flesh that seemed to be made of the deep ocean. And it was covered in them. Dozens of them. Pale, white porcelain faces of the drowned masks embedded in the black flesh. They weren't separate creatures. They were parts of it. They were its lures, its fingertips. And the light, the magnesium flare, was burning it. Where the white-hot light touched the black flesh, it hissed and steamed, dissolving like sugar in acid. The dozens of faces embedded in the mass were all screaming, their round, black mouths open, their featureless faces contorted in a shared, unified agony. Ben stood there, the hot, smoking flare gun in his hand. He had found it. Not just a way to signal. He had found a weapon. The shriek of the siren was a sound that did not belong in the world. It was the agony of 1,000 voices, a wet, bubbling, deep-sea roar of pure thermal pain. In the blinding, chemical white light of the magnesium flare, Ben, Diaz, and Riley watched in frozen horror as the thing in the stairwell recoiled. The massive, black, pulsating flesh, covered in the smooth, screaming porcelain faces, retreated. It was a living wave, pulling back from the searing light, boiling and steaming where the flare's intensity touched it. It didn't just move, it dissolved back into the flooded darkness of the stairwell, a nightmare retreating from a sudden, unwanted sun. Then the flare, its magnesium fuel spent, sputtered and died. Corridor was plunged back into the sickly, dim green emergency light. The silence that fell was 1,000 times more terrifying than the shriek. It was the silence of a predator that had been wounded. A predator that was enraged. The smell in the air was overpowering. Ozone, burnt magnesium, and a deep, coppery, ancient smell like a wet electrical fire mixed with rotten fish. "It's gone," Riley whispered, his voice trembling, his hands still clamped over his ears. "No," Ben said, his voice a low, hard rasp. He chambered the spent cartridge, his hands moving with a new, grim purpose. "It's angry. And now we have a weapon." He turned, his eyes wild, and shoved Diaz and Riley, who were still dazed, back into the emergency locker. "On your feet. Now." We don't have time to be scared. We have time to move. The shock and Ben's new harsh command snapped them back to reality. Diaz! Ben ordered the survival suits. The orange ones. Get all 3. They're insulated. We're going in the water. Riley! Ben grabbed an empty canvas supply bag from a hook and threw it at him. That green box. The flares. All of them. Get all the cartridges. Tuff the bag. Now. Ben himself grabbed the remaining flare gun from the box, there were 2, and the heavy, waterproof A-perb beacon. He began stuffing his own pockets with high-energy foil-wrapped bars. For a full minute, the locker was a blur of frantic, desperate motion. They were no longer victims. They were survivors, rearming. Suits on, Ben ordered, tearing his own orange suit from its packaging. They were heavy, neoprene, insulated suits designed to survive the freezing Atlantic. They struggled into them, their hands shaking, their hearts pounding. They didn't zip them up all the way, it was too hot for now. Ben reloaded his flare gun. He gave the second gun to Diaz, along with a handful of shells. You're the rear guard, Diaz. You hear that song again, you don't ask, you don't look. You fire. Understood. Diaz, his face pale but his eyes hard, nodded, clutching the gun. Understood. Okay, Ben panted, the heavy suit already making him sweat. He looked at his crew. The life rafts. They're on the aft boat deck. That's 2 decks up. We can't use that stairwell. He jerked his head toward the dark, steaming hole the Siren had retreated into. It's guarding it. So how do we go? Riley asked, his bag of flares slung over his shoulder. We go forward, Ben said, pointing down the other end of the corridor. To the main companionway. It's a longer run, it's closer to the bow, but it's the only other way up. They stepped out of the locker, a grim, orange-clad team armed with light and hope. And the ship answered. A deep, tectonic groan moved through the hull, so powerful it threw them all against the bulkhead. The ship, which had been listing at 20 degrees, suddenly lurched, tilting another 5-10 degrees. The water at the low end of the hull surged, now knee-deep. It's moving, Riley yelled, grabbing a pape for balance. Diaz, his hand pressed flat against the vibrating bulkhead, his eyes wide, had a terrible realization. Then the thrum. The pulse. It's back. He was right. A low, subsonic thrum was vibrating in their bones. It's not just a noise, Diaz said, his voice shaking. It's resonance. Singing to the ship. It's finding the weak points, the stress fractures from the original sinking. It's using the ship's own frequency to break it. It's tearing the ship apart around us. As if to prove his point, the corridor in front of them, their only escape route, screamed. 50 feet ahead, the steel bulkhead on the port side buckled inward, as if punched by a giant invisible fist. The metal seams ripped open with a sound like a thunderclap. A high-pressure, solid geyser of black, freezing seawater exploded into the corridor, slamming the opposite wall with the force of a freight train. It wasn't a leak. It was a wound. The Siren, enraged by the light, had stopped trying to lure them. It had stopped trying to herd them. It was sinking the cathedral. And they were still trapped inside. The roar of the new geyser was absolute, a deafening solid wall of sound that drowned out all thought. The high-pressure jet of black, freezing water struck the opposite bulkhead, atomizing, filling the corridor with a blinding, icy spray. This was not a leak, it was an execution. The Siren was sinking the ship, and it was starting with them. The water level, already at their ankles, exploded upward. Corridor became a raging, chaotic river in seconds. The force of the surge knocked Riley off his feet, and Diaz and Ben had to grab him to keep him from being swept back toward the Siren stairwell. It's over. We're trapped, Riley screamed, his voice barely audible over the roar. The water's too fast. We'll be cut in half if we try to pass it. The water was at their chests. The ship lurched again, the list deepening, turning the corridor into a violent, sloshing, tilted tube. It wants us to stay here, Ben roared back, his mind racing, the adrenaline cutting through his fear. It's blocking us. It's hurting us. It thinks it can drown us right here. He looked at the solid jet of water, then at the rapidly vanishing ceiling. There was only one way. Zippers! Now, Ben bellowed. Suits on. All the way. Hoods up. Seal your cuffs. In the middle of the raging, rising torrent, the three men clumsily obeyed. They were already soaked, their hands numb, but they zipped the heavy, insulated orange suits up to their chins, pulling the neoprene hoods over their heads, sealing the wrist cuffs. Diaz! The flares! Ben shouted. Are they waterproof? The bag is. Mostly. Diaz held up the canvas sack, which was now submerged. Good enough. Ben looked at the geyser. The breach is high. The water is deep enough. We're not going through it. We're going under it. Swim! Diaz yelled, his eyes wide. In this? In the dark. It's the only way. Ben pointed. That's the main stairwell, 50 yards past that breach. That's our way up. We swim or we die. We go on my count. Take the deepest breath of your life. We stick together. We don't stop. We go. Ben, Diaz, and Riley braced themselves against the bulkhead, the water now at their necks. The geyser was a solid, horizontal wall of fury just 10 yards ahead. 1, Ben shouted. 2, 3. The three men took one last, gasping breath of the foul, misty air and plunged under the surface. It was a world of pure, black, silent chaos. Ben, his flare gun still clutched in one hand, kicked, his fins, built into the suit, finding purchase. It was utterly black, but the turbulence was his guide. He could feel the geyser, a massive, vibrating underwater storm to his left. He swam, pulling himself along the ceiling-mounted cable trays, his body angled against the ship's sickening list. The water was vibrating. The thrum-thrum-thrum of the siren was in the water, pulsing against his chest, disorienting him, shaking his very bones. He glanced back. He could see nothing. He didn't know where Riley and Diaz were. He had to trust they were behind him. He was passing the breach. The water was a washing machine, trying to suck him into the hole or slam him against the far wall. He was a piece of debris, a rat in a flooded pipe. He kicked harder, his lungs on fire. Just a little further, just a little further. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his ankle. Ben yelled, a useless explosion of precious bubbles, and spun around, kicking, his flare gun raised. It was Riley. His eyes were wide with panic behind the suit's visor. He was snagged. Canvas flare bag was hopelessly tangled in a nest of hanging, drowned electrical wires. Riley was trapped, thrashing, anchored in place. Ben didn't hesitate. He swam back. He couldn't untangle it. He fumbled at his belt for a knife he didn't have. Riley was panicking, his movements becoming weaker. He was out of air. Ben saw the strap. He couldn't unhook it. He braced his feet against the bulkhead and tore it, ripping the bag from Riley's suit. The bag of flares, their only weapon, tumbled away into the blackness, lost. He grabbed Riley's harness and shoved him forward. He had no air left. His lungs were collapsing. Kicked, blind, desperate, up. His head broke the surface. He choked, gasping, sucking in the stale, metallic air. He had made it. He was in a wide, open space. The main companionway. The water here was calm. And deep. It was a dark, still, silent lake. He had surfaced in the middle of a massive, flooded atrium, the grand central staircase of the Ironclad rising up out of the water like the skeleton of a dinosaur. Riley, he gasped. Riley surfaced next to him, choking and spitting. The flares. Ben, I lost. We're alive, Ben snapped. Diaz, report. A few yards away, Diaz's head bobbed up. I'm here. I made it. They all fell silent. They weren't in a corridor anymore. They were treading water in the heart of their own ship, a flooded, dark cathedral. The only way out was up the grand staircase, its lower half vanishing into the black water. We did it, Riley panted, relief flooding him. We're safe. No, Diaz said, his voice a terrified whisper. We're not. Listen. The thrum-thrum-thrum was gone. The roar of the geyser was a distant, muffled sound. The water was silent. Too silent. Then, from below them, in the dark, still water, the thrum returned. Not as a vibration. As a sound. A deep, rhythmic heartbeat. Thrum. It's here, Ben whispered, realizing the horrifying truth. It didn't block us. Drove us. It herded us in here. Calm, black water around them began to swirl. Not a fast-moving current, but a slow, massive tidal rotation. Something vast was in the water with them. It was circling them just beneath their kicking feet. They were floating in a black, still lake, and the monster was beneath them. The slow, oily swirling of the water was the only sign of the creature's massive, hidden bulk. It was circling. Ben, Diaz, and Riley, clad in their orange suits, huddled together, treading water, a tiny bright speck of life in a vast, flooded, dark cathedral. It drove us in here, Diaz whispered, his voice chattering with cold and terror. This is its lair. We're in its element. No, Ben said, his voice a low growl. He was scanning the darkness, his eyes finding their target. 30 yards away, the Ironclad's grand staircase rose from the black water like a spine of bleached bone. The lower steps were submerged, but the main landing was above the new, artificial waterline. It was an island. It was safety. The stairs, Ben pointed. That's our way out. That's the way up. It's circling, Ben, Riley whimpered, his eyes fixed on the slow, massive rotation of the water. It's toying with us. Then we stop being toys, Ben said. We swim. Not fast. Not slow. We swim together for that landing. Don't splash. Just swim. Now. He took the lead, his strokes powerful, cutting through the frigid water. Diaz and Riley fell in beside him. They were a third of the way there. The water was still. Too still. Thrum. The heartbeat was back, right beneath them. It's here, Riley choked out. It's right. A swirl of water directly in front of him. Riley screamed and recoiled. Something touched my leg. It touched my leg. Keep swimming, Ben yelled. But it was too late. The time for toying was over. 10 yards in front of them, between them and the safety of the stairs, the black water humped upward. It was not the full, massive body. It was an appendage. A glistening, black, ropey arm as thick as a tree trunk rose silently from the deep. It uncoiled, rising 10, then 15 feet into the air. And at the end of it, like a grotesque, pale flower, was a drowned mask. It wasn't swimming. It was being held aloft, its blank porcelain face turned toward them, its dark mouth open. Then to its left another rose, and to its right a third. Perfect, silent, three-headed blockade. They were herded, and now they were cornered. Ben, Diaz, and Riley stopped swimming, treading water, staring at the impossible, silent tribunal that had risen from their ship's grave. The central mask spoke. It wasn't his father's voice. It was his own. You did so well, Ben, his own voice whispered, echoing in the vast, flooded space. You were so strong. But it's over. You brought them home. Now just rest. It was the song, but personalized. A final, gentle, lethal invitation. Diaz, Ben yelled, shaking his head, breaking the spell. The gun! Light them up. Now. Diaz, his face a mask of terror, raised the flare gun he'd been clutching. His hands, slick with water and trembling, fumbled with the safety. I can't, he stammered. The gun slipped. With a small, terrible plop, the second flare gun vanished beneath the black water. No! Riley screamed, a sound of pure despair. They had just lost half their remaining arsenal. The three masks tilted their heads in unison, a gesture of mocking, alien curiosity. Ben didn't hesitate. He didn't curse. He didn't panic. He raised his gun, the one he had held onto, the one that was already loaded. He aimed, not at the closest mask, but at the central one, the one that wore his voice. Go to hell, Ben snarled and pulled the trigger. The bang and the whoosh were a single, deafening explosion of defiance. The magnesium flare shot across the water and struck the central mask directly in its blank white face. For a split second, there was a flash of pure, sun-white light. Then an explosion. The drowned mask detonated in a shower of pale fragments and steaming black ichor. The shriek that erupted was not from the mask, but from the main body below. The appendage that had held the mask writhed, snapping like a massive, burning whip, lashing the water into a frenzy, spraying them with foul, boiling water. The other two masks, their faces contorted in a silent, shared agony, were yanked under, pulled back into the depths by the recoiling, wounded creature. Path was clear. "Swim!" Ben roared, shoving Riley forward. "Go! Go! Go!" It was a sprint, a desperate, thrashing three-man chaos of arms and legs. They were no longer silent. They were animals, fighting for the shore. Ben's hand hit something solid. Marble. He clawed his way up, dragging his body from the heavy pull of the water. He collapsed, gasping, onto the wide, flooded landing of the grand staircase. Diaz and Riley scrambled out after him, a tangle of orange suits and trembling limbs. They were out. They were out of the water. They lay on the tilted, wet marble for a long, shuddering moment, just breathing, the sound of their own hearts pounding in their ears. We're alive," Diaz panted, a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. We're on the stairs. We're safe." Ben rolled over, his chest heaving. He pushed himself up, his flare gun still clutched in his fist. He looked up. The grand staircase, their only path to the boat deck, was their sanctuary. And it was their tomb. 20 feet above them, the staircase ended. The middle section, stressed and broken by the ship's violent lurching, had collapsed. A 10-yard, black, impassable gap separated them from the upper levels. The way up was gone. They were out of the water, but they were not safe. They were on a tilted marble island, surrounded by a black, monstrous lake, and their only path to survival was a 30-foot, impassable chasm of air. Ben, Diaz, and Riley stared, gasping, at the collapsed midsection of the grand staircase. The Ironclad, in its death throes, had torn itself apart, marooning them. It's gone," Riley said, his voice a hollow echo in the vast, flooded atrium. "The way up, it's gone. We're trapped. We're trapped, and it's still down there." As if in answer, the black water swirled. The thrummer was still there, enraged, wounded, and waiting. "No," Ben said, his voice a low growl. He was scanning the darkness, refusing to accept it. He was done being a victim. He was a leader. He had to find a way. "We're not trapped. We're rerouted. Look!" Pointed not up but across. The grand staircase was in a massive 3-story atrium. On all sides, balconies for each deck overlooked the open space. The ship's 25-degree list had turned the entire room into a disorienting, tilted box. The balconies, Diaz panted, catching Ben's logic. "Deck 3. It's that way. The jump is too far. 20, 30 feet and we'd have to climb." "No, not the balconies," Ben said, his eyes fixed on the center of the atrium. "Look!" Hanging from the distant, shattered ceiling was the ship's chandelier. It was an enormous, old-world monstrosity of bronze and crystal, as big as a small car. It was hanging not straight but at a crazy, skewed angle, its lower, crystal-draped edge swinging gently just above the black water. "A chandelier?" Riley said, his voice cracking. "What are we going to swing on it?" "Don't be stupid," Ben snapped. "Look past it. On the far wall. The maintenance gantry." Diaz and Riley followed his gaze. On the opposite side of the chasm, a narrow metal catwalk or gantry ran along the bulkhead. Two was damaged. The ship's lurching had snapped one of its supports. The gantry, twisted and bent, was now hanging down, its broken end dangling in the middle of the gap, about 10 feet away from their landing. It's 10 feet, Diaz breathed, a 10-foot jump. At a bad angle. Onto twisted metal. In the dark. "Ben, it's suicide." "It's the only way," Ben said. "We jump, we climb, we get to the deck 3 balcony. From there, we find another way up." I can't," Riley said, shaking his head. I can't make that jump." "You will," Ben said. The black water below them swirled again. And the song began. It was not the invitation this time. It was a weapon. The beautiful, multi-layered harmony returned, but it was thrumming with a new, dark, resonant power. It wasn't just in their heads, it was in the air. Riley, who was closest to the edge, froze. His face went slack. So warm," he whispered, his eyes glazing over. The kitchen. I should go home." He took a single shuffling step back toward the water. Diaz too was faltering. "The code. I almost had it. The answer. No, Ben roared. It's a lie. It's not real. But they couldn't hear him. They were lost. The siren was going to pull them one by one back into the water to their deaths. Ben knew what he had to do. He had 2 flares left. 2 shots. He couldn't afford this. But he had no choice. He ripped the flare gun from his belt, his hands shaking with rage. He snapped a cartridge, his second to last, from his pocket and loaded it. He didn't aim at the water. The siren was too deep, the song too pervasive. He aimed up at the shattered crystal chandelier. Snap out of it, he screamed. He fired. The bang and the whoosh were a godsend. The flare shot up, struck the chandelier, and exploded in a shattering of crystal and a blinding white-hot magnesium sun. The atrium was lit, brighter than day. The song died instantly, replaced by a deep, bubbling, agonized roar from the water below. Riley and Diaz collapsed, grabbing their heads, the psychic link severed. Ack! My head. On your feet! Ben yelled, grabbing them, hauling them up. There's no time. Look! The light of the flare, still burning, illuminating everything, showed them the gantry. 10-foot jump. It was their only path. Diaz! You first. You're the most level-headed. Jump for it. Diaz looked at the gap, at the twisted, hanging metal, and nodded, his face grim. Okay. But as he tensed, a new sound cut through the roar of the siren. A wet metallic scraping. Ben spun, his gun still hot, his last precious flare in his pocket. He aimed his gaze down the staircase at the black water they had just crawled from. A drowned mask was crawling out of the lake. Its pale, blank face, its long, skeletal limbs clawing its way up the marble steps. Then another, right behind it. The light of the flare was flickering now, its fuel dying. They were trapped. The path forward was a suicidal jump. The path back was blocked by the 2 nightmares that had taken Elias. The siren was done luring. It was done sinking. It was time to feed. The magnesium flare, lodged in the chandelier, gave one last violent effort and died. Darkness, thick and absolute, crashed back down, broken only by the dim, sickly green emergency strips on the far wall. The silence that followed was worse. The siren's roar of pain had faded, replaced by a new, horrifyingly close sound. It was the sound of wet, gray hands on marble. Ben! Riley whimpered, his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the stairs below. They're here. Ben didn't need to look. He could smell them. The same foul capriosone scent from the bridge. The 2 drowned masks, dripping and silent, pulled themselves up onto the landing, their featureless, pale faces turning, sensing them in the gloom. They were 10 yards away. Diaz! Riley, Ben said, his voice a low, hard command. The gantry. Jump. That is an order. I can't. Riley was hyperventilating, his legs frozen. It's too far. I'll fall. The masks took a slow, gliding step forward. Slap. You'll fall if you stay, Ben said. He turned to Diaz. Diaz! Get him there. Make him jump. What about you? Diaz asked, his eyes darting between Ben and the advancing creatures. I'm right behind you, Ben lied. He fumbled in his pocket, his numb, wet fingers closing around the last precious 12-gauge flare cartridge. I'll cover you. Go. The masks were 8 yards away. Diaz grabbed Riley by the front of his survival suit. You are not dying here, Riley. You hear me? Move. He hauled Riley toward the gap. Jump! Jump! Diaz shoved him. Riley, in a blind panic, stumbled, ran 2 steps, and leaped into the blackness. He didn't scream. He just fell. A heavy thud and a clang of metal. I got him, Diaz yelled. Ben flashed his tiny, suit-mounted emergency light across the gap. Riley hadn't made the platform. He had missed, but his hands had caught the twisted lower railing. He was dangling 30 feet above the black, swirling water. Diaz, go! Ben yelled as the masks took another step. Diaz didn't hesitate. He took a running start, a perfect, desperate leap of faith, and flew across the gap. He landed hard on the bent, metal catwalk, the structure groaning in protest. Got it, he yelled. He immediately scrambled to the edge and grabbed Riley's arms. "I've got you." "Climb. Climb." Ben was alone. He was on the marble landing, backing away, his boots sliding on the wet stone. 2 drowned masks were between him and the gap. They fanned out, flanking him. "It's over, Ben," his own voice, mixed with his mother's and Elias's, a 3-part harmony of despair, echoed in his head. The song was starting again, a low, targeted, psychic whisper. "You're the last one. It's so much easier. Just stop." "No," Ben whispered, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function. He raised the flare gun. Snap. He broke the barrel. The spent, smoking cartridge from the chandelier shot fell out, clattering on the marble. He had 1 shot. 1 cartridge. He fumbled it from his pocket, his fingers slick. He tried to slide it in. He dropped it. The red cartridge rolled, wobbling on the tilted floor, stopping at the feet of one of the masks. Ben's heart stopped. The masks looked at the flare, then looked at him, tilting their blank heads. They didn't understand. They just knew he was cornered. They lunged. Ben, with no other choice, dove, sliding across the wet marble under their grasping, skeletal arms. He grabbed the cartridge, rolled, and slammed it into the breech of the gun, snapping it shut in one desperate, fluid motion. He was on his back. The 2 creatures were on him, their pale, featureless faces filling his vision, their round, black mouths opening to shriek. Ben jammed the barrel of the flare gun up between their 2 faces and pulled the trigger. The world ended. Point blank, 12-gauge magnesium explosion. The sound was not a bang, it was a detonation. The entire atrium was lit by a flash of white so bright it burned his retinas, even through his eyelids. The shriek of the 2 masks was not a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of agony that slammed into him. The concussion of the blast, so close, blew the 2 creatures backward. Their porcelain faces shattered, their bodies smoking and sizzling, they were thrown from the landing, tumbling back into the black lake, a cloud of steam and burnt flesh. But the blast also threw Ben. He was blown backward, his body slamming against the marble balustrade, which cracked and gave way. Then, he heard Diaz scream his name. He wasn't falling toward them. He wasn't falling into the water. He was falling sideways, into the gap, into the dark, twisted wreckage of the collapsed middle section of the staircase. He hit the pile of jagged, broken marble and steel with a sickening, bone-jarring crunch. He landed. His body twisted at an unnatural angle, on a slab of concrete 10 feet below the landing. His leg was wrong. A sharp, white-hot pain exploded from his thigh. He looked down. A piece of steel rebar, jutting from the broken marble, had impaled him, pinning him to the debris. He was alive. He was conscious. But he was separated from his crew. He was badly injured. And his last flare, the gun was gone, skittering down the debris in the darkness, lost. He was alone, unarmed, and pinned, a sacrifice in the dark. The flash of the magnesium flare seared the world white. The shriek of the masks was cut short by the detonation. Then, the sound of Ben's body hitting the debris. A sickening, wet crunch. Then silence. Then, Diaz, his hands raw from the gantry, screamed his name. He and Riley, who was now clinging to the catwalk, peered down into the chasm. The dim, green emergency light flickered, struggling to relight the vast, dark atrium. Below them, on the jagged, broken heap of the collapsed staircase, they saw him. Twisted, crumpled, orange figure. He's not moving," Riley sobbed, his voice broken. "Ben, oh God, Ben. He saved us," Diaz breathed, staring in numb horror. Then the orange figure moved. A pained, shuddering groan echoed up from the darkness. "Ben!" Diaz yelled. "Ben, can you hear me? We're coming." Ben's head lolled. Pain was a white-hot, blinding ocean. He tasted copper. He tried to push himself up. He couldn't. He looked down. He wasn't just injured. He was impaled. A thick, black, jagged spike of steel rebar, thrust up from the broken marble, had punched through his left thigh, pinning him like an insect to the wreckage. He was alive. But he was trapped. He was bait. "Diaz," he gasped, the words tearing his throat. "Riley, don't come back. Get out of here. We're not leaving you." Riley screamed, tears streaming down his face. We will find a way. A rope, something. There's no time, Ben roared, the effort sending a fresh wave of agony through his body. He looked down. The black water of the lake, just a few yards below his precarious perch, was swirling. The thrum-thrum-thrum had returned, a slow, deep, confident pulse. The thrummer, the siren, knew. It knew he was pinned. It knew he was helpless. It wasn't going to send masks. It wasn't going to sing. It was done playing. A shadow, vast and dark, moved beneath the surface. Ben, we can... Diaz started, his mind racing, trying to find a solution, a rope, a cable, anything. Diaz, listen to me, Ben commanded, using the last of his captain's authority. There is no way. You can't get to me. And I am not getting out. From the black water, a new shape emerged. It was not a mask. It was not a tentacle. It was a hand. A massive, gray, webbed hand, its 3 fingers, each as long as a man's arm, tipped with black, obsidian-like talons. Rose, silent and dripping, from the lake, the arm attached to a bulk of shadow Ben could not comprehend. It was reaching for him. Oh my God, Riley whispered, watching, paralyzed, from the gantry above. Riley! Ben yelled, his voice frantic. The beacon. The EPIRB. Did you grab it? Riley, his hands shaking, fumbled inside his survival suit. He pulled out the small, bright yellow emergency beacon. I have it. I grabbed it from the locker. Then that's the mission, Ben gasped as the giant webbed hand touched his boot. That's it. That's the only win. You get to the surface. You get off this ship. You launch that beacon. You tell them. You warn them. Ben, no. We can't, Diaz argued, his voice breaking. We don't leave you. The hand closed around Ben's ankle. The grip was impossibly strong and cold. Colder than the water. You do, Ben screamed, his voice cracking. Elias, he died to get us here. He bought this. I'm buying this. This matters. Now, go. The hand pulled. Ben screamed. A raw, tearing, animal sound as the rebar in his thigh held him fast. The monster was pulling him. The ship was holding him. He was being torn in two. He looked up, his face a mask of pure, white-hot agony, his eyes finding his 2 crewmen. Go. Run. Live. Tell them. Gah. Diaz watched, tears streaming down his face, his body locked in horrified indecision. This was his friend. His captain. Ben screamed again as the rebar tore deeper. That was the sound that broke the paralysis. Diaz knew. Ben wasn't a man anymore. He was a sacrifice. He's right, Diaz whispered, his voice dead. He grabbed Riley's arm hard. He's right. He bought this for us. He turned his back on his captain. He turned his back on the screaming. Climb, Diaz ordered, his voice hollow. As Ben's scream was cut short by a final sickening crunch and a heavy, wet splash as the siren tore its prize free and dragged him and the rebar under the black, swirling water. Diaz and Riley, their souls scarred, ran. They scrambled up the twisted, hanging gantry, climbing hand over hand, away from the horror, away from their fallen leader, up into the dark, unknown, ruined levels of the dying ship. Diaz's arms burned, his muscles screaming as he hauled himself over the bent railing of the Deck 3 balcony. He landed on the tilted, soaking wet carpet, then immediately turned and grabbed Riley, pulling him up and over. They collapsed, a heap of orange and terror, their backs to the vast, dark, open atrium, their faces toward the new, unknown black corridor of Deck 3. And then silence. Below them, the black lake was still. The violent splash of Ben's end, his final agonized scream, had faded. There was no echo. There was no thrum. The monstrous psychic heartbeat of the Ironclad had stopped. The ship was dead. The only sounds were the slow, agonizing groan of stressed metal and the steady, distant hiss of the ocean, relentlessly pouring into the ship's lower decks. Ben was gone. Elias was gone. Riley, his body shaking, curled into a fetal position, his face pressed against the wet carpet. He was weeping. Not a loud, defiant cry, but a low, broken, silent sob, his shoulders heaving. He's gone, Riley whispered, the words muffled. Ben, Elias, they're all gone. We ran. We just left him. He was screaming. Diaz lay on his back for a long, cold moment, staring up at the dark, tilted ceiling. His grief was a cold, hard, physical weight in his chest, so heavy he could barely breathe. He had just watched his friend, his captain, be torn apart. He had made the choice to run. That choice had to mean something. He rolled over, the motion and agony, and crawled to Riley. He grabbed the front of his survival suit, his grip weak but his intention iron. "Listen to me," Diaz hissed, his voice a low, raw whisper. "Listen. Yes, we left him. We ran. 'Cause he told us to. 'Cause he screamed at us to run. Do you understand?" He shook him. "Elias, Ben, they were captains. They knew what they were doing. They gave orders. They ordered us to live. They traded their lives for this." Diaz's hand, shaking, moved from Riley's suit to the small, hard yellow box attached to his chest. The EPIRB. The beacon. They bought this beacon. With their lives. If we stop, if we cry, if we lie down here and wait to die, then they died for nothing. Do you understand me, Riley? Nothing. He hauled Riley up, forcing him to sit. He looked him dead in the eyes, his own face a mask of grime, salt, and terrible cold resolve. "I am not going to let them die for nothing. We are not. We are going to get this beacon to the surface. We are going to tell them. Now, on your feet, Riley." He waited. "On your feet." Slowly, his eyes dead but his body responding to the new, hard edge of command in Diaz's voice, Riley stumbled up. They were two. Alone. Unarmed. In a dark, sinking, tilted maze. Diaz took a step, activating the tiny, weak emergency light on his own suit. Cast a pathetic, narrow cone of white. The boat deck. It's one deck up. Deck 4. There has to be another stairwell. Forward. He took the lead, stepping from the balcony into the main corridor of Deck 3. The floor was flooded. It wasn't the deep, black lake of the atrium, but a 6-inch deep, sloshing, icy river of seawater. Every step was a heavy, cold splash. They were in a maze of crew quarters and ruined labs. The ship's list, now a permanent 30-degree tilt, made the floor a steep, treacherous hill. The water constantly, hungrily, pulled at their legs, trying to drag them toward the low port side. Doors were open, hanging off their hinges. Furniture, chairs, mattresses, clothes floated, bumping into their legs in the dark. It was a claustrophobic, aquatic nightmare. Their world was reduced to the tiny, bobbing cone of Diaz's light, and the sound of their own progress. Flash, flash, flash. They moved for what felt like an eternity. Past the ruined galley, where pots and pans clattered, moved by the unseen water. Past the rec room, where a lonely billiard ball rolled over and over, back and forth in the sloshing water. They were cold, they were exhausted, and their hope was a tiny, flickering ember. But they were moving. Diaz stopped. He put his arm out, grabbing Riley's chest. "Wait!" "Shoo!" Riley froze, his breath catching. The corridor was silent, save for the groan of the ship and the gentle lap-lap of the water against the bulkheads. "What?" Riley whispered. I heard it again," Diaz whispered back. They stood dead still. They held their breath. Flash. It was not them. It was ahead of them. Somewhere in the dark, around the next corner. Flash, flash. It was a footstep. A heavy, slow, deliberate footstep, wading through the same water they were. What is it?" Riley whispered, his entire body trembling. The big one? The thrummer." "No," Diaz said, his blood turning to ice. It's walking. It's on 2 legs. From the darkness, just ahead, a faint metallic scrape echoed, followed by another splash. One of the drowned masks had survived. Or another one had come. It was in the flooded halls with them. It was hunting them. And they had no flares left. Flash, flash, flash. The sound was slow, rhythmic, and impossibly heavy. It was the sound of a nightmare waiting. Diaz clicked his tiny emergency light off. Total, absolute darkness. He grabbed Riley's arm, his grip like a vice. Riley let out a small, terrified squeak. "Sure," Diaz breathed, his mouth directly next to Riley's ear. "Don't." breathe. The splashing was getting closer. It was just around the corner in the main artery of the corridor, not 20 yards away. "In here," Diaz whispered, his voice barely a vibration. "This cabin. Now. And don't make a sound." He pulled Riley, who was frozen stiff, backward through an open, dark doorway. They were in a flooded crew cabin. The water, just as deep as the hull, sloshed around their legs. The sound seemed deafening to Diaz. Flash. The sound from the hull stopped. Diaz's heart hammered against his ribs. It had heard them. He shoved Riley hard toward the back of the room. "Hide. Closet. Anything." The splashing in the hall resumed, but it was different. Faster. It was coming toward their open door. Diaz's eyes, adjusting to the pitch black, made out a shape. A tall steel crew locker, its louvered, slatted door slightly ajar. "In! In!" he hissed. He shoved Riley into the narrow metal box. Riley folded himself in, his body shaking so hard the locker vibrated. Diaz squeezed in after him, pulling the louvered door almost shut, leaving just a tiny quarter-inch crack to see through. They were in total darkness, in a flooded metal coffin smelling of rust and old, damp clothes. Flash, flash, flash. The sound was right outside the cabin. A silhouette, impossibly tall and thin, filled the doorway. The faint green emergency light from the hall outside backlit it. It was a drowned mask. Glided into the room. Diaz clamped his hand over Riley's mouth, feeling his hot, frantic breath, stifling the sob that was building in his throat. The mask waded into the center of the room. Stopped. Tilted its head as if listening. Diaz and Riley were frozen. They couldn't breathe. The silence was agonizing. The mask knew they were in here. It was hunting. Glided with that awful, smooth, wet sound toward the floating, waterlogged bed. With one long, gray skeletal arm, it lifted the entire heavy, soaked mattress as if it weighed nothing. Checked underneath. Nothing. Dropped the mattress. The splash was so loud, Diaz flinched, sure it would hear his heart. The mask turned. It was looking right at their locker. Diaz could see its blank, pale, featureless face through the slats. It was 10 feet away. Took a step. Flash. Another step. Flash. It was coming. Diaz's mind raced. He had nothing. No flares. No weapon. Just his hands. He braced himself, ready to kick the door, to gouge at its face a final futile, screaming act of defiance. The mask stopped, inches from their louvered door. It raised its hand. Diaz's entire world compressed to that single gray, webbed hand. The hand reached and grabbed the handle of the locker next to theirs. With a high-pitched, rusty screech of metal on metal that cut them to the bone, it tore the neighboring locker door open, smashing it against the bulkhead. It looked inside. Empty. For a long, terrible moment, it just stood there, listening. Its blank, porcelain face, a foot from their own, separated only by a thin sheet of louvered steel. Then, apparently satisfied, it turned. Glided silently out of the room. They heard it splash, splash, splash as it continued its patrol down the corridor away from them. Diaz and Riley did not move. They did not breathe. They waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes. The sound was gone. There was nothing but the groan of the ship. Diaz finally, slowly released his hand from Riley's mouth. Riley slumped against the back of the locker, his body trembling, silent sobs racking him. It's gone," Diaz whispered, his own voice shaking. He pushed the locker door open and stumbled out into the flooded cabin. "For now. It's patrolling. We can't," Riley choked out. We can't go out there. It's hunting us. We'll never make it. It'll hear us." Diaz, his mind racing, knew Riley was right. They couldn't walk. They couldn't wade. The sound of their movement was a dinner bell. It'll hear us," Diaz repeated, his eyes scanning the room. "It'll hear us in the water." He looked up. His tiny emergency light, weak as it was, illuminated the ceiling. The vent," he whispered. "What?" Riley asked, looking up. Diaz pointed at a large, square ventilation grill. "Remember, on the bridge, the mask? It came out of a vent. They used the vents. You want to go in there?" Riley's voice was a terrified squeak. In the dark? In the tunnels? What if it's in there? It's not, Diaz said, a grim, new, desperate logic forming. It's patrolling the hallways. It's in the water. It's hunting for things in the water. He waded over to the bulkhead. He pulled the floating bed under the vent. It's the only way, Riley. We can't walk. So we crawl. He climbed onto the bed, his feet sinking into the wet mattress. He reached up. He could just touch the grill. We go over it, he said, his voice hard. We crawl through the ceiling over its head and we find the stairwell from above. The thought of the dark, tight, claustrophobic metal tubes, the other creature's hunting ground, was almost worse than the water. But it was their only chance. It's the only way, Riley. We have to go up. Diaz climbed onto the floating, waterlogged bed, the mattress sinking under his weight. He reached up, his fingers gripping the edge of the ventilation grill. It was cheap, thin steel held in by 4 screws. It's screwed in, Riley stammered, his voice hopeless. We can't. We are, Diaz snarled. He didn't have a tool. He didn't have time. He braced his feet and pulled. The metal screamed. The screws tore loose from the rusted ceiling panel. Diaz yelled, a raw sound of effort, and ripped the entire grill free, cutting his gloved hands on the sharp, torn metal. He threw it into the water with a splash. They both froze. They listened. From the hallway, nothing. Patrol, for now, was out of range. Diaz, his chest heaving, looked up into the square, black hole he had created. It's tight. I'll go first. I'll check if it's clear. Then I'll pull you up. Diaz, I can't, Riley whispered, his eyes wide with a new, claustrophobic terror. It's a tube. It's what if we get stuck? Diaz dropped back onto the bed. He grabbed the front of Riley's suit, his face inches from his. Riley, focus. The mask is in the water. We can't be in the water. This is the only other way. Ben died so we could get here. You will climb. You will follow me. You will get that beacon to the surface. Am I clear? Riley, his body shaking, just nodded, his eyes shut tight. Good. Diaz let him go. He turned, climbed back onto the bed, and pulled himself up, his arms straining, his boots finding no purchase. He wormed his way into the black, narrow opening. He was in. He clicked on his tiny suit light. It was worse than he could have imagined. A square metal tube barely 3 feet by 3 feet. It was filthy, caked in decades of dust and rust, which was now a wet, foul-smelling sludge from the humidity. And as he'd feared, the ship's 30-degree list turned it from a crawl space into a climb. It was a ramp, angled steeply upward. It's clear, he called down, his voice muffled. Come on. I'll pull you. He braced himself and reached down. Riley, with a choked animal sound of pure terror, jumped, grabbed Diaz's arm, and allowed himself to be hauled, scraping and clumsy, into the duct. They were in. 2 men in bulky survival suits in a pitch-black metal coffin. Okay, Diaz panted, the air already feeling thick, tasting of iron. We go up. We go slow. And Riley, no noise. Not a sound. It's right below us. They began to crawl. It was agony. It wasn't a crawl. It was a climb, a brutal, agonizing shuffle, their knees and elbows scraping on the metal. Scrape. The sound, to Diaz, was as loud as a gunshot. They had to be hearing them. They crawled for 10 yards, the only light the weak, bobbing cone of Diaz's headlamp. He stopped. He put a hand back, motioning for Riley to freeze. What? Riley whispered. Diaz pointed down. They were at a junction, crawling over a louvered vent that looked down into the main corridor, the one the mask was patrolling. And it was there, directly beneath them. Diaz clicked off his light, plunged into darkness. He and Riley, frozen, peered down through the slats. The drowned mask, its pale face a ghostly, featureless oval in the dark, was standing in the flooded hallway. It was still. It was listening. They had been heard. The mask tilted its head, its blank white face turning, looking up directly at their vent. Riley made a tiny, hiccuping sound. The mask reacted. It knew. Glided forward under them. It raised one of its long, gray skeletal arms. Its fingers, impossibly long, scraped against the outside of their duct. Preope. The sound of the talons on their thin, metal hiding place was the most terrifying sound Diaz had ever heard. Riley was, literally, biting his own gloved hand to keep from screaming. The mask knew they were in there, but it couldn't reach them. Couldn't break through the thick steel ductwork. It hissed. A low, reptilian, frustrated sound. It scraped the duct one more time, a sound of pure malice, and then it moved on. They heard it splash, splash, splash as it continued its patrol, its footsteps fading into the distance. Diaz and Riley stayed frozen for a full minute. Then Diaz, his whole body trembling, turned his light back on. It's gone, he breathed, the relief so profound it was almost painful. We're safe. We're past it. He looked at Riley. You okay? Riley, his eyes wide, just nodded, unable to speak. Okay. The main stairwell, it has to be this way. Diaz crawled forward, leading them on. The ductwork was a maze. They crawled, scraping, climbing, for what felt like an hour, their bodies on fire, their suits snagging on torn metal. They reached a junction. A T in the duct. Diaz stopped. He shined his light to the left. The duct was collapsed. Twisted, impassable, dead end. Damn it, Diaz whispered. It has to be right. He shined his light right. The duct was open. It was a long, dark, black square tunnel. It was their only way. He was about to crawl forward, but he stopped. He held his hand up. Wait. What? Riley whispered. Did you hear it again? No, Diaz whispered, his blood running cold. Not from below. He listened. From the darkness of the right tunnel in front of them, a new sound. Faint wet scraping. Prape, scrape. It wasn't a patrol. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something or someone crawling in the same ventilation shaft coming toward them. Prape, scrape. The sound was faint, wet, and it was coming from the darkness in front of them. From their only way out. What is that? Riley's voice was a strangled, barely audible wheeze. He was already at the edge of his sanity. Diaz, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest, aimed his tiny, weak suit light down the right-hand tunnel. The beam was pathetic. Barely cut the gloom. But it did illuminate the glistening, wet, metal walls. And it did catch movement. It was not a man. It was crawling on all fours, its limbs splayed at unnatural, spider-like angles, its back to them. It was scraping its way, away from them. No. Stopped. It had sensed the light. Slowly, impossibly, its head rotated a full 180 degrees, its blank, pale, porcelain face staring back at them, its featureless expression catching the weak, white light. It was another drowned mask. Oh. God, no. Riley's composure shattered. It's in here. It's in here with us. He started to scramble backward, his bulky suit shoving Diaz, his movements clumsy and loud. Prape. Clang. Diaz, go back. We have to go back. I'd rather drown. Stop. Diaz hissed, grabbing him. Riley. Shut up. It'll hear you. But it was too late. The mask, its head still swiveled backward, heard them. It heard Riley's panicked shout. The scraping stopped. For one heart-stopping second, there was silence. Then a new sound. A frantic, wet skittering. It had flipped over. It was scrambling toward them. Fast. Back. Riley screamed, kicking at Diaz. There is no back. Diaz roared, his own panic rising. He was trapped between Riley, who was beating on his chest, and the advancing monster. We can't go back. The other one is down there. He looked down. His light flashed onto the floor of the duct. There, he yelled. The grill. The floor. It's our only way. It was another louvered vent, identical to the one they had peered through just a few feet ahead of them. Below it was blackness. We kick it out. We drop. Diaz yelled. The skittering was loud now. Clang, scrape. Clang. It was running at them in the dark, narrow tube. They had seconds. Kick! Diaz screamed. He and Riley, their bodies tangled in the narrow space, began to stomp and kick at the vent grill. Clang! Clang! The sound was deafening, advertising their position, but they had no choice. It's not breaking," Riley screamed, his kicks frantic and weak. "Together," Diaz commanded. They reared back and slammed their boots down in unison. Crunch! The rusted metal tore. The grill gave way, bursting downward, falling into the blackness below. A square, dark hole had opened at their feet. The skittering was right there. Diaz could hear its wet, hissing breath. He could smell the ozone. "Riley! Go! Drop!" Diaz bellowed, shoving him into the hole. Riley screamed, a high, thin sound as he fell, vanishing into the dark. Diaz spun, his legs swinging into the hole. He was half out. A gray, skeletal, impossibly fast hand shot out of the vent's darkness and seized his ankle. "Aya!" Diaz yelled. He was stuck. The grip was like a steel trap, crushing his ankle. He was dangling, half in the duct, half out, his free leg kicking wildly. "Diaz!" Riley's voice screamed from the darkness below him. Diaz looked. The mask was on him. It lunged, its blank porcelain face filling his vision, its other hand clawing at his chest, scraping his suit. Pulled, trying to drag him back into the duct. He was stuck. He was dangling. And the creature's black, round, featureless mouth opened, inches from his face, inhaling, preparing to shriek. The drowned mask shrieked. It was not the resonant, glass-shattering sound. It was a close, wet battle cry, a sound of pure, murderous rage, inches from Diaz's face. Diaz was stuck, his ankle crushed in the creature's steel-like grip, his body dangling helplessly from the black square hole. Below, in the dark, Riley was screaming his name. The mask pulled, its impossible strength hauling Diaz up, back into the suffocating dark duct. Diaz saw what was about to happen. He would be dragged into the dark. He would be killed. And then the mask, its hunt unfinished, would drop down and kill Riley. Riley, who had the beacon. Riley, who was the mission. "No!" Diaz roared, a sound of pure, final defiance. He stopped fighting the pull. Instead, he lunged. He grabbed the mask's blank porcelain head with both hands. He hooked his free foot onto the mask's shoulder. "If I'm going," he screamed, his voice echoing in the shaft, "I'm not going up!" With a final, desperate, superhuman thrust, he kicked and pulled. He wasn't escaping. He was attacking. The mask, its grip on his ankles still firm, was caught off balance. Diaz's weight, combined with his pulling the mask down, was too much for the creature's perch inside the duct. With a final, tearing screech of metal, the drowned mask lost its grip on the inside of the vent. And they both fell. Diaz, the mask, and a shower of rusted, torn metal crashed from the ceiling, landing in a violent, chaotic splash in the dark, flooded room right next to Riley. Riley screamed, scrambling backward. The water was a churning, white frenzy. Diaz surfaced, gasping, his leg broken where the mask had crushed it. The mask surfaced right in front of him. It was furious. "Riley! Run!" Diaz screamed, punching the mask's hard, blank face. It was like hitting a marble statue. "Find the stairs. Go!" Riley was frozen, his tiny light illuminating the nightmare, the final fight. "The beacon!" Diaz gurgled as the mask's skeletal, gray hands closed around his throat, forcing him under the water. "The mission. Go." That word, mission, broke Riley's terror. He knew what this was. This was Ben. This was Elias. This was a sacrifice. Riley turned. He ran. He splashed, blind and sobbing, away from the sounds of the struggle, away from his last friend. He ran into the dark. He slammed into a bulkhead. Wrong way. He turned, desperate, his light sweeping. Another corridor. This one slanted. It was slanted upward. A stairwell. He fled. He scrambled up the stairs, two at a time, away from the fight, away from the sounds of Diaz, which had stopped. There was only silence behind him now. He climbed. He clawed his way up the tilted steps, past the ruined dark landing of Deck 3, toward Deck 4. He saw a door. A heavy steel fire door warped in its frame, a thin line of light coming from under it. Light. He threw his entire body against it. Once, twice. With a groan of tortured metal, the warped door screeched open, and sunlight hit him. He stumbled, blinded, sobbing, and fell out onto the aft boat deck. He gasped, the cold, clean, salt air hitting his lungs. The storm was over. The fog was lifting. And the sun was rising, a brilliant, terrible blood-orange streak on the horizon. He was out. He looked around. The Ironclad was finished. The deck was tilted at a 45-degree angle. The stern, where he stood, was high in the air. The bow was gone, already under the waves. The ship was a dying animal, groaning its last breath. He saw them. The life raft canisters. He scrambled, his broken, raw body crawling and sliding across the steep, slick deck. He reached the nearest one. His gloved hands, torn and bloody, fumbled with the manual release pin. Grun. The ship lurched. The final plunge. It was going. He tore the pin free. Canister fell, sliding down the deck, smashing against the railing and dropping 50 feet into the churning, debris-filled water. Cord snapped taut. Whoosh! A bright orange life raft inflated on the surface. His escape. He was about to jump. But as he looked down, the ocean next to the ship frothed. Boiled. The water rose, humping up, and the siren emerged. It was not a mass. It was a mountain. A mountain of pulsating, black, ropey flesh, fused with the wreckage of 1,000 ships. Masts, hulls, bones, all part of its body. And in the center, a core of pulsating, pale, beautiful, terrifying light covered in thousands of screaming, singing porcelain faces. It rose over the sinking ship, a god of the deep, and it roared a shriek of triumph and rage at the rising sun. Riley stared, his mind breaking. Saw him. The 1,000 faces turned to him. And the song began. The final, ultimate, beautiful lure promising peace, warmth, and end to the pain. Riley shut his eyes. He saw Elias letting go. He saw Ben impaled, screaming, "Go!" He saw Diaz fighting in the dark. He unzipped his suit, not to die, but to reach the beacon strapped to his chest. He looked at the monster. Sang for him. Riley turned his back. He faced the sun. And he jumped from the sinking ship, away from the raft, away from the monster, into the open, cold, empty ocean. He hit the freezing water. The suit popped him to the surface. He paddled, gasping, away from the wreck. The siren, it ignored him. It was feasting on the Ironclad. It wrapped itself around the hull and pulled, dragging its prize down to the deep. Riley floated. Alone. Crying. Alive. He raised the yellow beacon. His thumb found the switch. He flipped it. Tiny red light flashed. Blink. 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 The Ironclad slid beneath the waves. The monster was gone. The ocean was silent. But Riley floated. And the beacon was on. The mission was over.